I'm live now. Okay, well, I think we've been going for a while, have we not? It's always a drama, isn't it, with this thing? Anyway, I've just went to that box there. We've got the first question coming up, which is from Vicky. Vicky, yeah, at Vicky. Sorry, at Vicky. It's from Vicky. Alex Albon has said that the Red Bull is what it is, and Sergio Perez said the car is developed only for Max. How significant are both comments? I think for any driver, the most important part of skill is adaptability. Well, I would agree with you 100% there, Vicky. And I think any driver that blames the car or his race engineer, because they're all very good, the race engineers, or anything, you know, that's easy to blame, is not actually being self-critical enough to ask the question, why am I not doing the same job as the guy in the other car? And we see that time and again in the history of Formula One. A second driver, the other driver is slower, and inevitably he blames some other aspect that isn't himself. And it always leads to a downward spiral. Classic, very headline examples would be Sebastian Vettel when he left Red Bull, didn't address some of the issues that were showing up in his driving alongside Daniel Ricciardo. And the same with Fernando to some extent when he was at McLaren alongside Lewis. I mean, his response to Lewis being very quick in some areas, in a lot of areas, quicker in some cases than Fernando, but Fernando's still quicker in other parts of the vernacular. His response was to say, right, this is, you know, McLaren not doing me right, I'm leaving. And again, you know, I don't think he's really, he's a great Grand Prix driver, there's no doubt about that, Fernando Alonso, but he didn't address the problems at the time. And it's a very easy thing, I guess, for racing drivers to get into that mode, because you know, there are so many things to blame, as we've said many times before. And I think in this case, I think Alex Albon is being pretty realistic, as he would be. He's a pretty realistic sort of guy. I don't know how self-critical he is these days, but he's realistic, I think. And whilst he's got very supple, nice inputs, he still has long corners, and he's all basically driving on the rear of the car, waiting for the power to come in before he really feels what he wants to do with the corner. Not the power, waiting to make sure that he's got the car loaded before he does anything cool with the car. Whereas I think Sergio Perez, different sort of driver, because he doesn't really drive with understeer at all. And it's all about just getting the car in as wide as he can, and then just using this great talent he has for getting the power on nice and smoothly and evenly on the loaded rear. And he's really good at that, which is one of the reasons he's very good at defense. He doesn't make many mistakes on the exits of corners, but he's not very good on the first part of a corner, and never has been, unlike even Albon. And I think that's where, you know, he's saying the car was set up for Max, but the reality was, if Max had understeer, he could still get the car pointed basically to do the rotation he wanted by incredible manipulation of the throttle against the brakes, against the steering. Whereas Perez sort of just wants the front to work and then does what he does with the power, a little bit like Sebastian Vettel. And so that's why you see those two differences of opinion. So I'm just going to flash back. I know this is annoying, but I'm just going to flash back into the studio to see if everything looks okay. It does right now. So I'm going to, on this basis, I'm going to sort of continue and assume the audio and everything is working perfectly, even though these things love to come back and bite you. I'm going to have a look at the thing now as well, just to make sure nobody's actually saying it's all looking good. So I'm assuming if it wasn't, people would be complaining. One thing I was saying before, I just got slightly sidetracked there. I was saying that we've done quite a lot of work behind the scenes over the winter. One of those is at the back end of our YouTube channel, which has been going for quite a long time now. And I don't know why this hasn't been found before, but I would say at least 25% of the videos at the back end are all listed as private, which means they can't be watched. And to my mind, they've always been public, like everybody else, like all the others. And there's a lot of them there with quite a lot of views on them that are now private. Quite interesting videos, you know, like the John Surtees interview, for example. And I can only assume that's because at some point, I know our YouTube channel did get hacked. And one of the byproducts of that was that a lot of the videos just went private overnight. And although we did as much work as we could at the time to make sure that was alleviated, it didn't obviously do it 100%. So I'm currently in the process of making a lot of the videos that have had views and likes or dislikes public again, and that won't impinge any of you who are pinge on the live stream or the live announcements for any of you that are subscribers. Normally you would get a sort of little thing, you know, Peter Windsor just put out a new video, but because these have already been watched, when I make them public, that won't happen. So it won't be annoying in that respect. But there are quite a lot of good ones, I would say good, wouldn't I, which have 0 views, and if I make those public, they will come out, even though they're sort of 20 years old in some cases, they will come out, or 15 years old, they will come out as a new video from Peter Windsor. So in order to stop that happening, I'm actually putting those out on my community channel page now on the YouTube channel. And they're effectively going out as unlisted videos with a link, and you can watch them. If you go into community, you can watch them. That's the only place you can watch them, and I think that's probably the best way to do that. So that's just a heads up, really, that we're doing a lot more with that YouTube community section now. So if any of you would like to post there, you can now with YouTube. That's a new thing, and I'll just give you the there's a community URL now that we can actually put up, which where are we? I don't know, can't find it now. Anyway, it's okay, it's YouTube Peter Windsor /community. There you go. Pretty simple. So you can get in there and you can actually upload images and do your own comments now as well. So it's pretty good. So we've already got some coming in like that. I did this a couple of days ago, sort of said what we were doing with community, and it's pinned up there. But we've already had some questions coming in through community, and I think it's quite good if we look at those as well. Here's, for example, this is from Flying Paddy. Mr. Windsor, if possible, Mr. Windsor, Peter, please. Can you describe to us viewers how race weekends evolved over the years during your time as a fan to working with a team and then as a journalist? Do you feel it has lost some of its charm, so to speak, or is it still the same atmosphere amongst the teams and drivers, or has it got that corporate culture to it nowadays? No wrong or right answers, just curious on your perspective, as you can lean on decades of experience. Well, I can indeed. I hear in your voice how enthusiastic you are when talking about WRC and rally drivers, and get the idea that this is what Formula One was once like for you. Thank you for your time. Yeah, well, thank you very much for that, Flying Paddy. It's, yeah, things have changed massively. I was only saying yesterday we were playing, Jack did pretty well with his golf in the break, and he was actually playing with 3 young 20-year-old American college golfers from Scotland. And we played in a La Manga, actually, lovely course near us here. And they're all +3, which means they're better than scratch. I mean, they're virtually pro. And they're on their way to getting their cards to play on the professional tour. And basically Jack muscled his way in to be the 4th player there on that practice round. Anyway, I was talking to the dad of one of them, and he knew somebody in Formula One, inevitably, as they do. And he was saying, oh, I'd love to go to a Formula One race, you know, it'd be brilliant to go to the paddock. And, well, he didn't say that. He just said, you know, what's it like in the paddock, a bit like you, and, you know, wouldn't it be great to go, sort of thing. And I, you know, inevitably you have to say, well, going to a Formula One paddock these days, even if you've got the nice little paddock pass, there's a lot of security guards around. There's a lot of signs saying invited guests only. There are a lot of closed doors, a lot of dark windows. There's a lot of people having what look to be very nice 5-course lunches, of which you're not taking part. And in the middle of it all, between all those incredible motorhomes, there are sort of journalists and TV crews wandering around, seeing if there's anybody they can talk to, and waiting for the next communal driver or engineer interview thing, which is all, you know, very frustrating and annoying, really, from my point of view, because the best conversations I've ever had in Formula One have always been bumping into people and just chatting to them for 5 or 10 minutes. Oh, what happened here? Why did you do that? Yeah, oh, okay, right, yeah, good. Oh, I can't talk about that. Yeah, okay, no problem. You know, that sort of conversation. And they just don't happen anymore, because everybody's, even if you do bump into an engineer, you know, wherever, walking down the pit lane, walking down the paddock, they're not allowed to say anything anyway. And, well, drivers for that matter, they're always in a rush, you know, drink bottle, earpods, the whole thing, and earbuds. And so it's just not the same. I'm not saying Formula One itself is less attractive, or I mean, it is in some ways. It's more attractive in others. I'm talking about the racing now. But in terms of being in the paddock, it's all regimented. And basically, if you go as a journalist, you've got to behave and structure your weekend around the teams and their press conferences and what the other journalists are doing. You end up doing what everybody else is doing. And me, always being a sort of free spirit in Formula One, I've always wanted to do my own thing, and I find it very annoying now. You can't even go to the car park where they park their cars and just hang out there and talk to them when they're getting in their cars. There's a security guard there as well. So yeah, you know, and that's, yeah, rallying. You go to a rally, and yeah, for sure, you can go into the paddock, and it's not, usually you can sneak in without a pass if you really want to, and you can go and talk to the drivers and talk to the mechanics and the team managers, no problem at all. And it is a bit like Formula One as it used to be. Not that Formula One was unprofessional or unpolished. I mean, even if you go back to the sort of Ron Dennis, Bernie Ecclestone days when the pit lane was immaculate, all the garages were immaculate, and the motorhomes were big, you could still talk to everybody, and it was basically that feeling of being part of a family. But it's from my perspective, it's not now, and I understand it in a way. You know, each team has become its own mega media hub, and they want to protect everything, and nobody's allowed to understand anything except them. And yeah, it's just, but it's not the same. That's all I can say, and it is a shame. And from my point of view, in the different roles I've been lucky enough to play, you know, it's evolved during those roles. So nothing that applies to whether I was being a team manager, driver manager, TV guy, writing, you know, whatever I was doing, running a company for Ferrari behind the scenes, whatever. It's evolved anyway, and it is what it is now. And it was always more fun back then. And I if you look at my community page, you'll see a picture I put up recently, a picture I took at Dijon 79. The weekend Jean-Pierre Jabouille won the French Grand Prix in a French car, on French tires, with a French engine, with French fuel and oil. And it was also the weekend of the Arnoux Villeneuve battle around Dijon. And there's a picture there of the lunch break and by the Renault motorhome, which is a caravan, and Jean-Pierre is just coming out of the caravan, and Jacques Lafitte who's the opposition, is sitting there having a laugh, and it's, you know, those days are over, aren't they? So it's a great shame. Anyway, thanks for that. Very good. Another thing on the we're doing on the community page are surveys. Starting to do a few, and I thought this was an interesting one because Pirelli have come out with a new sidewall logo for 2026. I quite like it actually, and I'm not surprised that 70% of you like it and 30% don't. So that's good feedback for Pirelli, I think. Good bit of design there. And that's one of the great things about Pirelli. They are very good at graphics and very good at design, and that's one of the reasons we should all respect Pirelli's presence in Formula One, regardless of what if there are any tire issues. They do a very good job for Formula One, I think, in general. And here was another survey we did, a poll. Mercedes and Red Bull have legally found a way of increasing engine power, albeit with a system that isn't in accordance with the spirit of the regulations, which I think is the case. Should this loophole be closed before the season starts? Interesting, eh? Quite a lot of votes on that one. 7,200. 63% of you say no, these regulations this loophole should not be closed. And I think what that means is that you'll like to see engineers in Formula One pushing things to the limit and being creative. And we are at the pinnacle of engineering, so why not do that? And I think that's good. It's an interesting one, isn't it? So that we'll pass that one on to the FIA, I think, or more Formula One anyway. And then from Vicky R. Hello, Peter. Great job on creating a community. There, I put that in because, at least some of you are starting to notice that the community is easy to find on the YouTube channel, and it's effectively, I'd like to see it become what Twitter used to be. Really, obviously, it's not going to be open to people outside the community, but it's all about being able to post whatever you want to post, and pictures that may be interesting to the rest of the subscribers on the channel. Next, we would like to see you in a sim racing setup doing track guides before every race weekend. Oh, well, there you go. About the sim racing setup. I'm just about at the edge of my technical expertise such as it is doing what I'm doing here, let alone trying to put some sort of sim deal get together. But it's a good point, though. I think, somebody like Mark Slade would be very good, wouldn't he, at just previewing every race. And we're starting to do that already. He's starting to, the last 3 or 4 races in 2025, we were talking to Mark about the challenges of Brazil. We talked to him about the wet, potentially what might happen there. We talked to him about Qatar and I think we'll do more of that with Mark as we go towards the first race in 2026. And obviously, as I said before, we'll do some stuff when the new cars are coming out as well with Mark. But also we'll get Scarbs back in as well to look at the aero, and we'll have some good input too on the power units and drivetrains that everybody's doing for 2026 as well. So I'm hoping to get right on top of that with the cars, and I think Mark's going to be working hard, I think, in the first few races when we're trying to get on top of all the strategy that's going to be used. Okay, back to our normal YouTube chat. And you're very welcome to use this one as well, obviously, because this is a live chat, and it's easy, much easier once the show's underway. This is the way to do it, I think. Just going to scroll to the bottom again as well, just to see if there's anything saying nothing much happening. No, it looks all right. Actually, there's a super chat at the bottom, so I'll bring that up straight away. Actually, sorry about that one. This is from Kevin Kvora. Thank you very much for that, Kevin. How risk this new rules will be if it doesn't work? For me, changing rules is part solution, but the problem is the track we are racing, like Monaco. Yeah, well, there's always a balance. There's all those balls up in the air in terms of really what is the problem in Formula One. And I say problem, I mean, Formula One's quite good at creating problems that don't even exist. And a lot of that comes from, and here I'm bashing an old chestnut, I know, it comes from believing that Formula One has always got to have as much overtaking as possible, and that's the only way it's going to develop as a sport and grow as a sport and get more money in as a sport. We've got to have overtaking. And that's a lot of what we're seeing now is still under that heading. Got to have more overtaking, regardless of what it does to the art of defense, regardless what it does in terms of the sort of circuits that are now being built to create as much overtaking as possible. And that's why you're seeing circuits like Vegas, because it's like an overtaking DRS spectacular, isn't it? But it's not actually a racetrack. That's the difference. And that's one of the things that I always find quite, quite frustrating, as you know. So, yeah, circuits, we have to be careful with always coming down on the back of Monaco, because if you watch the Monaco Grand Prix, because you love Formula One, because Formula One has lots of overtaking, you're always going to be disappointed. And I think, for me, if I think about it, if I think about the upcoming race, in normal circumstances, excluding all these ridiculous DRS tracks like Vegas, but if you're thinking of the proper circuits, you're always thinking, what sort of race is that circuit going to produce? Oh, Brands Hatch, yeah, it's always going to be about defense. It's always mega defense at Brands Hatch. Love that race for that reason. Or Monza, yeah, Monza's always going to be slipstreaming. This is the older days, and let's have some good slipstreaming there. And then you get Monaco, yeah, impossible to overtake, but it's going to be about not making mistakes. It's going to be about getting a perfect qualifying lap. It's going to be about in today's world, it's going to be about strategy as well, obviously. And now I think they're going to have mandatory 2 pit stops, aren't they? And so you have all these different things, and it's a bit like seasons. You don't want summer 12 months of the year. You want the seasons. And if one circuit engenders defense and another engenders slipstreaming, and this one does have overtaking opportunities because the track's quite wide relative to the cars or whatever it is, so be it. But don't go to Monaco thinking you're going to see lots of overtaking. Go to Monaco and think, wow, this is where Fangio raced. This is where Sterling Moss raced. This is exactly the same place. This is where Sterling Moss won the first Grand Prix for Lotus. This is where Jack Brabham won his first Grand Prix. Whatever you want to do, you can go right up to Lewis Hamilton, David Coulthard, whatever it is. All this history is at Monaco. Plus, there's the whole Princess Grace, Rainier, Hollywood thing of Monaco, and that whole wonderful harbour and the imagery that comes out of Monaco and what it does for Formula One. And it's just a pleasure being at Monaco, walking up the hill when the track when the action is long since over and it's night time and you're walking up the hill towards Casino Square. And yeah, today it's a bit cheesy, but it's still Casino Square and it's still the Hotel de Paris. And you can, even if it's not there anymore, because that's where the Café de Paris used to be, and this is where this is where Ronnie Peterson used to get the opposite lock slide. And that is what Monaco is all about for me. You don't go there saying, oh, we're going to have lots of overtaking tomorrow. Oh, what a terrible race. We didn't have any overtaking. You go there because of the history and what this brings to Formula One. What's wrong with that? And I think that's, that's the way to do it. Okay. Actually, I'm going to press clear now, see what happens. Because it seems to have, oh, here we go, back to the top. Good. I was a bit nervous then because it seemed to have frozen this dreaded chat box. Why do you use this chat box, Peter? Well, I use it because it's got a nice graphic on screen. I like all of you who've got photographs to see your image up there. Here's Sarosh Showman, who's very good. Sorry, Sarosh Soman, very good at asking a whole bunch of questions. I'm going to have to be fair. I mean, it's only 2 I can see here, so that's good, Sarosh. Thank you very much indeed for being a part. Hi, Peter. Happy New Year. You were mentioning that Michael Schumacher maximized the usage of left foot braking. So people before him were using the right foot for brakes and throttle, even in auto transmissions. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it kind of changed in 1992. When Williams had the FW14B, and to some extent 89, the John Barnard car as well. But a lot of drivers still, at that point, still wanted to right foot brake, even though there was the potential in the very late 80s, early 90s to start left foot braking. And if you talk to Rubens Barrichello, I mean, he never stopped right foot braking, even at Ferrari. Even when Michael was driving a 2-pedal left foot brake Ferrari, Rubens always had a right foot brake set up in the pedal, and he never wanted to left foot brake. And I think he was the last Grand Prix driver actually to right foot brake. But yeah, good luck to him. It did slow him down. And as Rob Wilson has always said, it's if you use the brakes to balance the car, and you're doing something that you could never do if you were right foot braking mid-corner, that's great. But the problem with left foot braking is that it's very, very easy to balance the car with the left foot brakes. And, oh yeah, I've got rid of the understeer now. I've got the back end to come out a little bit. That's really good. I've just got a little bit of weight change. But how do you measure that against whether you're actually slowing the car down at that point? That's Rob's point, and he still thinks today, I was talking to him about it the other day, the very great drivers probably are just as able to modulate the weight change that they want with the right foot on the throttle. They're that sensitive to it. But for most drivers, the left foot braking has become a very easy, obvious way of driving to balance the car. But I would say, I'm only plucking a number out of the sky now, but if you look at today's grid, I would say only 20% of the drivers on today's grid are able very precisely to use the left foot brake perfectly to balance the car and not to slow the car down. And when I say slow the car down, they're not aware that they're slowing the car down. They've just got the balance they want, and that's great. But they've actually slowed the car down. And I think that to some extent that is the difference between a Max Verstappen and a Sergio Perez, or a Max Verstappen and a Yuki Tsunoda, or a Max Verstappen and a Liam Lawson, because I think left foot braking has become so much a part of driving today. For a guy like Liam Lawson or Yuki Tsunoda, it's just like you don't even, left foot brake is what you do. And are they as sensitive about that as Michael Schumacher was? I mean, and I say the other thing Michael did was also simultaneously, he was the first driver to start using the gears mid-corner because he could do so on the paddle shift against left foot braking. And that was way ahead of his time. And Michael in the early 2000s was just incredible there, what he was doing with the car. So yeah, thanks for that, Sarosh. Good question. Another one from you, second one from you. Peter, maybe I'm confused who said it. I think you mentioned that Sterling Moss said that racing shouldn't be about bravery, and also if one should never be angry in a racing car. Well, there's 2 different things there. Yes, Sterling Moss did say that, and he said that in a book. He certainly said it in Ken Purdy's book, All But My Life, that a racing driver is should be operating on anticipation and feel and not on courage. And if you're operating on courage, you're going to make mistakes and something's going to happen because you're not thinking correctly and your reactions are going to be different. If you're anticipating everything in a Sterling Mossy, Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton pre-21, Jim Clark sort of way, then everything's happening in a zone. You can feel what the car's doing milliseconds before it's going to do it because you've been warning the car and because you're trying to keep the car as flat to the road as possible in any given millisecond. And that's what Sterling means by that. And if you think that this corner should be taken flat, but it just feels really scary to do so, and you just basically shut your eyes and take it flat one lap, that's going to end in tears. That is not the way to drive. You only take a corner at the speed that you feel the car can do. It's nothing about you. It's what you feel the car can do. And the car will tell you if it can go through that corner flat or not. Yes. Then there's another thing, anger. And then there's another thing, which is competitive instinct, which should not be, in my opinion, confused with courage. And in Dennis Jenkinson's book, The Racing Driver, which is still in many ways the standard work on dissecting a racing driver's makeup, he has a chapter called tiger in inverted commas. And that was the word he always used for a driver that had tiger and a driver that didn't. And in his opinion, for example, Jochen Rindt had tiger and Francois Sebert did not have tiger. And it's something that comes alight inside, a flame that burns. And it's a competitive instinct that if Nigel Mansell was talking now, he would say, yeah, of course I took risks and for sure it was about bravery, because that's the way Nigel thinks. There's nothing wrong with the way he thinks. It's perfect. I'm just saying that in reality, Nigel never did anything with a race car that required bravery more than it required skill and anticipation of what the car was going to do. Now, if you take Nigel's a very good example, the brave thing about Nigel's driving was his audacity to pass Nelson Piquet the way he did at Silverstone in '87. It's his teammate, don't forget. And everybody expects Nelson to win the race at that point. And Nigel's doing this double dummy and gets him going into Stowe Corner. That's not courage, that's tiger. That's tiger as defined by Dennis Jenkinson. That is sheer competitive burning spirit. And many racing drivers have that. Well, most of them have got it actually somewhere inside them because they're all competitive guys. That's why they're racing drivers. But it's not courage. It's a different thing. And it's harnessing that, which Max does so well these days. Although we should talk about the Spanish Grand Prix and how that went there, because that was anger, obviously, that whole business after the restart. And I said at the time that if you put a guy like Max Verstappen on the wrong tyres at a very late race restart, and he's got absolutely zero chance even to hold the position he was in, let alone to finish in the top 5 or 6, he is going to go berserk. I think I said something like that at the time. And so, a lot of people have said, Max lost the championship the way he reacted with the whole thing, and he, he shouldn't have done this, and they shouldn't have given the position back, whatever it was. To me, the millisecond they made that wrong decision on tyres, it was, this is Max. Max is going to go completely ballistic now. And in a way, I think that is part of the racing driver's makeup as well. When you do something completely ridiculous like that, or indeed Lewis's case, Abu Dhabi 21, although he only had one lap to go berserk, then you're not a racing driver unless you do react to some extent like Max, because it's just like, what is this all about? What are they doing? And you should react like that. If you think, oh well, yeah, we win and lose as a team. Somebody's made a mess up here, but I will drive around and I will try and finish 5th or whatever it is. You're not going to do the other things. You're not going to do the passing Nelson Piquet going into Stowe the way Nigel did. You've got to have that. You've got to have both of them. Now, anger like that, I think, is understandable. I'm not saying it's okay, but it's understandable. That sort of anger. I think anger with your petulance with race engineers is ridiculous, and that is wrong, and that should be expunged from any manager should expunge that from any racing driver's psyche, because that's only negative, and it's starting to blame somebody else, a race engineer. Now, there's a difference between what I've just described then and Max's reaction to the tyre thing, because he wasn't angry with his race engineer as such. It was just like, I'm a pretty good racing driver. I've got a pretty good racing car here, albeit not as good as the McLaren. I can at least finish third. And you've given me tyres now that are going to take me out of the top 6 or 7. What is going on? And that was it. And it's a difference. And you see, I'm talking about the sort of Yuki Tsunoda type reactions to some of the things his race engineer says, or other drivers we hear on the radio like that. And then anger against another driver. I think that's another thing. And if you look at what Max did, you might say, well, he shouldn't have been doing that. The world champion, bad example. But what he did was kind of, within the realms of relatively safe. If you think about it, Charles Leclerc has just moved over on him in 8th gear on the straight, and they've touched wheels on the straight because Max is going much slower, and Charles basically drives into him on the straight in Barcelona. And the interesting thing is that Max has never, ever done anything in return, has he? He's kept everything under control there, even though for sure he's still absolutely livid about that. And that's I think the maturity of Max Verstappen, the immaturity of Charles Leclerc, you've got to say. I mean, that was the most ridiculous thing. And that anger is, if it's the wrong sort of anger, can be unbelievably dangerous. Now, I don't know the couple of times that Lance Stroll has driven into people on the straight, whether that's anger or sheer incompetence. It's probably the latter, I would think. But, that's when anger needs to be controlled, when it's done in a very dangerous way at high speed, particularly on the straight. Brake testing is about as bad as it can get in terms of the list of things that are dangerous in Formula One. So, interesting question. There's a lot in there. But, going back to Sterling Moss, of course, he did race at a time when it was so dangerous. And if you put a wheel offline, there's a good chance you're going to be killed. And so therefore, there was a lot more respect for the circuits and for the other drivers as well in those days. And still the accidents happen. And there's much more respect. And the driving standards in terms of politeness and trackcraft were much higher then than they are now, because you can drive into people now and get away with it. That's the problem, isn't it? It's one of the problems with everything being so safe. But give me the choice, then or now, and the safety we have now, I'd always go for today, because safety is paramount in my mind. Another question. Zavish Dugal 7753. Someone said to me that the reason Michael is not the GOAT, the greatest of all time, is because he spent his peak in a bad Ferrari and that he chose business over winning. What do you think about this? No, I don't think so. I think anyone who watched Formula One around 96, 99 could see that Michael was phenomenally good, particularly in a car that wasn't a dominant car. And so anybody thinks that. I'm shocked that they would think that's a reason that anybody wouldn't list Michael as the greatest of all time. I think most people would say it's because he was quite a dirty driver, wouldn't they? The things he did, Jacques, and the thing with Alonso, Monaco, and a few other things he did, Damon obviously in Adelaide. Wouldn't that be the reason that a lot of people might say, oh, he's not as good as Fangio, or not as good as Ascari, or not as good as Lewis? Isn't that what people would say? They'd point to that stuff that Michael did. And of course, the interesting thing is, and I think it was Corey Pesatoro that pointed this out, was that Michael at one point said, well, I'm only doing what the footballers do, and to some extent what Ayrton did. I learnt this from Ayrton. And yet, as Corey said, when Ayrton did it, everybody loved it. When Michael did it, nobody loved it. And the world was changing, of course. And it was the post-Ayrton accident era. So everybody was a little bit more sensitive to what was going on. And I think, for me, there's no question Michael, in terms of sheer physical talent, was right up there with the very best. Absolutely no doubt about that. But I was not a fan of his antics on the track some of the time. But then hopefully I'm being objective when I say I wasn't a fan of Ayrton's antics either on the track. So, so long as we keep them bracketed together as two drivers that well extended the bounds of acceptability set by drivers like Clark or Moss, then that's okay. But we shouldn't cite Michael as a dirty driver out there on his own, because there were plenty of others as well. Sarosh Soman, Peter, the way Enrique Scalabroni was drawing, it was mesmerizing to say the least. So easily he was able to make the surfaces. Yeah, that's on a compilation video I put out over Christmas, showing a little bit of the drawing of Enrique Scalabroni. And also that was one of the videos that was private. I went back and it's now public again. So if you have a look for that, I think it's called Let's Draw, ! Something like that. And I did that video because, yeah, you're right. At the time, that what he's talking about and the drawing he did was relevant to the time and the coanda and the double diffuser and everything that was going on. But I actually wanted to do a video of Enrique drawing because he does have the nicest hand I've ever seen, ever, even well beyond the class of engineers that I know. He's just got the most, he can draw a perfectly straight line and a perfect circle. And he has everything visualized in his head before he starts, and you look at it, it's like, and you just see this drawing happening, and within a few, and watch the video, you see within a few minutes you can see how perfectly it's done. And he's got a beautiful hand and a wonderful brain, and he's still very creative. He's currently working on, I know he's working on a some sort of vertical takeoff aircraft and some sort of electric aircraft as well. And he's designing houses in Argentina. And he's one of the great talents, I think, of one of the great unsung talents. And today, even today, could probably lend a very interesting brain cell or two to any Formula One team and get them on the straight and narrow again. Very, very talented guy, Enrique Scalabroni. So yeah, thanks for that. And if you haven't seen it, that video is now public. It's called Let's Draw. And there's another one called Scalabroni Explains the Coanda Effect. And he does that with a spoon and a flow of water. And it's pretty good. You know, he's always, and the thing about Enrique is that he's one of these guys, he's so brilliant. I mean, his knowledge and his mathematical skill is so great that he knows that he would be a menace if he was driving on the road, because he can't keep his brain focused for very long on something as banal as driving a car. He'll immediately start thinking about engineering solutions and problems that are in his brain. And so he's never had a driving license. He's one of the great Formula One engineers, in my opinion. And he did that 1991 Ferrari, for example, the update on the Barnard car. And he did the Williams FW13 with Patrick Head, very nice car as well. And the Peugeot that won Le Mans. Several great things. And anyway, he's just so talented. Never been given real opportunity to do what he can do, I think. But I think any engineer that knows Enrique says, "Ah, yeah, Scalabroni, wow, yeah, very good." So there we go. Zavesh Dugal. This is, I think, also a reflection, thanks for this, on what the picture I put up in community, the picture of Bruce McLaren, Graham Hill, Jim Clark, Trevor Taylor and Dan Gurney making music that you posted. What is the story behind that, and who do you think is winning if all of them are given the same car for a season? Yeah, well, that picture's on the community thing. And actually, the picture of Graham Hill, he's got an accordion, so I sent that to Corey. And Corey said, wow, it looks like his right hand, he's actually playing the keys. Left hand looks a little bit lame. Jim Clark's on the drums from memory. But yeah, that's all every winter. It's an interesting thing, this, isn't it? Because I was musing in a live stream not that long ago about what Lando Norris might do as world champion and how things used to be in the old days, the good old days. And I'm just going to check my YouTube streaming page again just to make sure it looks relatively healthy. Yeah, it does, I think. Good. Famous last words. And I was saying, you know, Lando's the sort of guy that should relax a lot now and become a different sort of world champion. And there's quite a lot he can do within the sport in terms of driving other cars and other forms of motorsport. I think it's always great to see a world champion doing that. And beyond that, you know, and this is to my point, that picture was done as part of an annual function or two. And there used to be 2 or 3 of them every winter in aid of the one charity that Formula One, the one big charity Formula One supported, which was the Doghouse Club and the Springfield Boys Club, 2 charities, but they were fairly closely matched. in terms of how they spent their money. And all of that was fundraising, money raising for charity. And I think that was done at the London Hilton. And it was a sort of spoof thing. Obviously, the Beatles were big at the time. Music was really changing in the 60s. Les Leston was very good at putting all the boys together, the drivers, and doing things like that. And yeah, everybody had a laugh and all the wives got involved. So that's what it was done. It was a charity do in London. And they just did all that. It would be great, actually, to imagine trying to organise something like that today, trying to get sort of 8 or 9 Grand Prix drivers together to do a nice charity function at the London Hilton. This wouldn't happen, would it? This would not happen. And it's such a shame. And they all just did it because it was fun. And they just felt it was a duty to do that because they had this lovely privileged life of being Formula One drivers. Let's give something back. Let's do it for charity. Anyway, who do you think is winning if all of them are given the same car for a season? Well, interestingly, in those days, they actually did a few of those sort of mini one-make races. And there was one race, I think it was Minis at Silverstone 62, may have been 63, Daily Express Trophy. And about 6 or 7 of them did that mini race. And I think Bruce McLaren won that. I think Jim Clark finished 3rd or 4th, maybe got biffed off at the last corner. I think Graham Hill beat him. And they also had Morris 1100 races periodically. I know they did in New Zealand once. They were about the top. All the Tasman Formula One drivers did a Morris 1100 race, and they all decided to start in reverse, which was quite typical Formula One larrikins. But all were in the same car for a season. Yeah, I'd have to give it to Jim. I think Trevor's very underrated, but I mean, look at those guys. Dan Gurney, unbelievably quick. Graham Hill, almost unbeatable at many circuits. Spa, Monaco, good examples. Bruce McLaren, very, very fast, much faster than people ever gave him credit for. So I would say Jim, but I'm glad you didn't ask me for a finishing order because I wouldn't have any clue about how the others would finish behind him. Very, very close race, I would have thought. The other thing I'd say is that I did get to know Trevor Taylor reasonably well before he passed away. He was Jim Clark's teammate in 62 and then got effectively replaced by Peter Arundel, who then had a shunt, and then Mike Spence came in and then went back to Peter Arundel again. And Trevor was kind of left on the sides, driving midfield Grand Prix cars, and then did Formula 5000 very well, won a lot of races, but was never really given the Formula One opportunity he had. He was known as a driver that had a lot of shunts, but basically he was the victim of a lot of breakages on a number 2 Lotus, to give him his due. Anyway, I got to know him pretty well. And he said, Peter, you keep asking me about Jimmy, and Jimmy was the best. Jimmy was wonderful. He was my friend. He was the greatest driver I ever knew. But I got to tell you, Colin Chapman wasn't slow. And don't ever forget that. So I'm saying that now because I know Trevor would want me to say that. He kept telling me how good Colin Chapman was, well above average Formula One standard as a racing driver. So I thought I'd just mention that on Trevor's behalf. And of course, Trevor had a very good sister, Anita, who's very fast racing driver in her own right as well, Anita Taylor. Aaron. Hi, thanks, Aaron, for this. Another of our regulars. Peter, what are the advantages and disadvantages of having a very senior team member, e.g. Lambiasi, this is Giampiero, as the race engineer on the radio to the driver? To what extent have these factors contributed to Max's success compared to Max and a more traditional race engineer? Well, I think in the case of Giampiero, my impression is that he's incredibly good in terms of organization and all the things you need to be as an engineer. I don't think, because there are so many good race engineers on the pit lane, I don't think he's necessarily better in that area than anybody else. I would say that GP's quality is the way he understands Max and the tone of voice that Max needs and the sense of calm that Max needs in order to do the job that Max knows he can do. And I think GP's very, very good at that. It'll be interesting. The stories out there he's going to Aston Martin, and maybe that deal's done already. I don't know. In which case, that obviously is a precursor to Max going there, I guess. But I think it'll be interesting to see how he works now with other drivers, because from GP's point of view, if he's running, say, Fernando Alonso, it'll be very, very different to running Max. And some of the assumptions he will make when he's running, that he made when he was running Max, and then makes running Fernando, will not work. And it'll probably take quite a long time for the penny to drop on that, I suspect, because I don't think race engineers, and this is nothing specific to GP, but I don't think race engineers think massively outside their operational window in terms of their relationship with their driver. And there are certain givens. If you've worked with a driver for a long time, as GP has with Max, there are certain things you just assume will happen. And in some cases they won't. Of course, there may be pleasant surprises, and Fernando might be doing things that Max has never done in terms of GP's peripheral vision. And that's a good thing too. But it's not easy to just jump from one to another and do exactly the same job, I guess is what I'm saying. And your question actually says, to what extent have these factors contributed to Max's success? Well, obviously they've contributed, because without, if he'd had a really, really annoying race engineer that kept disagreeing with him and not understanding anything he wanted to do and constantly questioning Max's feel for the car, then the seasons wouldn't have been going as well. Obviously, there are not many like that in the pit lane, probably one or two still, but not many like that. But then on the other side of the coin, you've got to say that Max probably is at least 50% responsible, for GP being there for him, because he's the guy he wants and he can feel that, and then the two of them growing together, and morphing into some sort of incredible powerhouse. And that's obviously a lot of credit to Max. You know, I said a while ago, comparing Max with Michael, you know, the one thing Max probably would not be able to do if he was given a free hand would be to go to somewhere like Ferrari and take all the engineers and mechanics and people he wanted to create a whole new infrastructure around his position there. And I guess I'm starting to rethink that. You know, the way he and GP do work together is very impressive. And so maybe if Max, maybe Max has already done a deal with Aston Martin. He said, okay, give me Adrian Newey and a totally free structure of what he wants to do. Give me GP and I'll think about it. It's hard to imagine that if Max goes to Aston Martin in 27, regardless of what Aston do in 26 with Fernando, but if he goes there in 27 with Adrian and GP and Adrian's set up there, it's hard to imagine he wouldn't then win like 5 world championships in a row. I think he would. And in 26, I think Fernando's got a really good chance to win the championship. I really do. A lot of people say, oh, Honda, not the same as Mercedes. But Adrian knows Honda like the back of his hand. He's got Andy Cowell, who's got to be as good a power unit manager of we've ever seen, that's ever walked the planet Earth. Put those two together, put Honda and their resources together and their ability to respond to anything. I know that we've got templated drawing engines now and you can't make changes, but nonetheless, there's going to be small things that Honda will be able to do. And the electrification side, still an open book for everybody. So yeah, I think they'll be very good in 26 as well. Very good. And I think Fernando has got to be thinking, I've got to be ready. I've got to be ready for this, because, and when he will be, of course, he's been driving Terry Neuville type rallycross cars. So why wouldn't he be ready? So yeah, watch for Fernando in 26. Alessandra Durango, another of our regulars. Hi there. Hi, Peter, and Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you too, Alessandra. Which information is expected to come out in the closed-door preseason testing in Barcelona? Not much, I think, based on what we heard the engineers talking about. Was it that last race in Abu Dhabi, before Abu Dhabi? They're all saying, don't expect too much in that first test. We'll just be turning wheels and getting the engines to work, sort of thing. And even if we got some bits and bobs, we probably won't throw them on the car until Bahrain. And then even then we might not do anything until we get to Melbourne. I think it was then that Andy Stevenson said, oh, thanks for your testing plan, Paul, or something like that, which Paul Moynihan at Red Bull, which I think is a little bit, underhand, because Paul was not really saying anything that wasn't correct, which everybody knew anyway. So we'll see. I don't think we're going to see a lot more than whether or not these cars are reliable out of the box and relatively easy to run, and what they sound like, and Maybe people will be playing around with the push to pass thing. I don't know. And what active arrow is all about, I suppose, as well. What we'd also see in Barcelona early on, I guess, would be the things. Assuming we can get reasonable, I say we, I'm not talking about we, I'm talking about the fans, reasonable access actually to what's going on, and the teams don't do their usual thing of shutting all the doors and no information given out anywhere. It's about time, I think, that F1 got hold of these tests and said, right, these are effectively as open as races, and we want to know exactly what's going on because we want the fans to understand long before they get to Melbourne exactly how the active arrow is going to work, and we want to have graphics showing when the car's in an active arrow mode and when it's not. Maybe they're going to have that, I don't know. I doubt they'll have that for the test, but I think they should, because testing, you know, they might as well, they've done all their stuff behind closed doors in the factory, and when they get to the racetrack, in many ways it's the public arena. And Formula One, as I keep saying, loves to sell itself as the pinnacle of engineering technology. And if they're going to do that, they've got to make this technology very easy to handle by the public and understandable by the public. And the way to do that is to get it in organically from the start. But I don't think they will. I think they'll, you know, I think F1 will have to do what the teams want to do, and, you know, it'll all be wishy-washy press releases. Oh, you know, we covered a lot of miles today, we're happy with the car. Nobody ever says anything, do they? They never say, oh, the car's terrible, couldn't believe how bad it felt at turn 1 on the first lap, it wasn't even tire temperature, it was worse than that. You never have that stuff. It's always, oh, we're very, you know, looking forward to this, and very good run today, we covered X number of miles. Who cares? I mean, the only thing you want to know is if it's reliable, yeah, but the number of laps they do is kind of irrelevant, isn't it, if they are reliable. So anyway, I'm being slightly jaundiced about the whole testing thing, only because, you know, my mate Luca Montezemolo, and I say that because he is a bit of a mate and I've got a lot of time for him. I remember him at one of the constructors meetings quite a while ago now, hammering his fist on the table saying we do not make enough of testing, and these should be big events for the public with really good television, really good interviews when the drivers are sitting around waiting for the car to go out again, really run well and presented well for the public. We should get big TV viewing figures, and it should be a fun event for everybody to go to. Testing is what it's all about in many ways, and nobody listened, especially Bernie. So but I think he's right. I really think he's right. I used to love testing, watching the testing and hanging out there. Jez James, hi Peter, Happy New Year. Do you think with the advance of electric power units that Formula One will never get back to the spectacular sound of V10s, which will be very sad if that's the case? Well, yeah, speaking as somebody who's driven a V10 Formula One car, and that's another video I've made public again when I drove the T105 Toyota at Ricard V10. 900, it's about 700 horsepower, I think, when I drove it. Good fun. And there's, yeah, a nice sound of the engine too, got to say. Somebody who's done that, I obviously regret that we ever went away from V8s or V10s. Let's call them V10s because, you know, they were V10s and then they went to V8s, but 10s were the thing. And, you know, that could have been the Formula One that we have today had Formula One had the sense to adopt a Formula E championship long before Formula E as we know it today was invented, their own Formula E championship, which would then have been a part of the Formula One race card at most circuits of the world, in which all the teams lent their technology to the development of electric racing cars. And some of the drivers, maybe a bit like the Pro Car BMW thing, 6 times a year did races in these electric cars over the Grand Prix weekend. And it was something that Formula One owned, which then allowed the teams to continue running the Formula One with V10s and lots of noise and lots of power and lots of fuel, I guess. And at the same time, they're developing these exquisite cars of the future, these electric cars. And that would have been the perfect compromise, I think. And yet Formula One didn't do that. And because it didn't do that, John Todd then started up Formula E as a completely separate thing, and Formula One was left to sort of catch up and be a sort of hybrid thing, and now it's going a little bit more electric, and it's a mess, really. It really is a mess, because it should be just something that the public love, noise and power, and going back to the days of this is what Formula One is all about. Oh yeah, but look, there's Lewis Hamilton in the electric Ferrari doing the Saturday afternoon post-qualifying electric Formula E race. You know, why isn't that's what should be happening? Because that would have done a lot more for Formula E than Formula E as it is now, in my opinion, if the Formula One teams have been heavily behind it. But Bernie and Jean Todt decided that wasn't the way to go, and so that was it. And Formula One is left with what we have. But so I don't think we'll ever go back. No, and a bit like speed bumps. You know, even though they're ridiculous and they destroy the tracking on any decent racing road car, and even though the cars that really need to be slowed down, the big white transit vans that go through at 60 miles an hour, have no stopping power at all, even though they're not affected by speed bumps, we keep them. And they'll never, because we don't go back, do we, on anything. Speed limits. Think about this. The sleepy 70s speed limit on the motorways in the UK came in, I think, in 63 in response to some sort of fuel crisis. And at the time, Motorsport magazine led a huge petition to have this speed limit abolished. But they never went back. They would never do it. Before that, there were no speed limits on motorways in the UK. Well, they'll never go back. Sad. Jez James again. Also, when you said in your last live video that Senna only ever used a manual gear change, I think you'll find he drove for McLaren when they used their first semi-auto gearbox in 92. Well, yeah. But it wasn't... You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. He did use that in 92. Well, he had it right through to 94. Yeah, I was incorrect in saying that. But what I'm saying is I was really thinking about, the pole lap at Monaco 88 and all that stuff is what I was thinking about, not the very last McLarens and then the Williams that he drove, which would have been paddle shift. Because you're right. And I remember him saying how incredible it was for him to be able to keep both hands on the wheel through a corner. I remember talking to him about that now. So absolutely right. Forgive me for that. But what I was really referring to were those epic pole laps that we all talk about when we got the onboard and he's doing the manual shift. So thank you for pointing that out. Jez again, have you ever driven an F1 car? And if so, was it as you expected? Yeah, well, I drove that Toyota. And I drove that Toyota. I've driven a Lotus 21, a Lotus 49, Tasman Ferrari. What else have I driven? A Brabham, 64 Brabham, Climax, Formula One car. Brabham, I've driven a Cooper, no. Never driven a Tyrrell. Well, I think that's about it. But yeah, and the Lotus 49 was as I kind of expected, I guess. It was just it was quite soft, that was the nice thing about the Lotus 49. And you could almost, you could use the curbs and it wasn't throwing the car anywhere. It was lovely. I drove it at Zandvoort and the power was about what I expected. I mean, it's a lot, obviously, and it did come in with quite a bang, as the Cosworth DFVs did, but it was pretty much as I expected. And I wasn't getting the power on too early, that's for sure. And so I wasn't in any way pushing the thing, but it was a lovely car to drive, as was the Dino Tasman Ferrari. Gorgeous car, beautiful gearbox. The Toyota was... let me think what happened. The Toyota was, it was a funny test really, because I was out on slicks and it was very, very dark at Ricard and it looked like it was going to rain, but I went out on slicks and I had 2 spins when it did start to rain and managed to stall it, which was a bit embarrassing. And then they had to tow me in. And then I went out on intermediates and it was fine after that. It was, I felt, it was the only thing that surprised me actually was the amount of vibration in the car, in the cockpit, when you're holding the wheel and you're doing, reasonably high speed on the straight in top gear. And it was quite difficult to keep your feet absolutely square on the throttle because the thing was moving around so much on the bumps. It was very, very stiff. And I found that quite tiring, actually, to be honest. Not so much the neck. I wasn't going anything quick enough, but it was quite surprising how much vibration there was in the car. But otherwise, in terms of the feel of the car, the steering load, the handling, not that I got anywhere near the limit, I didn't. But the feel of the car was very, very, Lotus Alani. You could just feel what was going to happen before it happened. It was the impression I got. I had a couple of jinks occasionally, just the back end did that, and it was no problem at all. That's a lovely car to drive. in that respect. Beautiful. V10 was just gorgeous, which is why I keep going on about V10s. You know, I think I'm allowed to, aren't I? Because at least I've driven a V10 Formula One car. And so if I, you know, I'm in a position to say how great those engines were. And they were cheap. And they were 12, 13 million, I think, for the entire season package. You could buy an engine or rent an engine, it was, from whoever, Renault, Toyota, whatever. And today, you know, I think it went up more than double overnight in 2014 when they went to the hybrid engines. For what purpose, you know? Because Formula One hadn't got its act together and done its own Formula E. That's why. Max 790. Peter, I still can't believe Sainz was better than Lewis in every metric against Leclerc. 1 lap speed, race points, podiums, etc. How do you know? You were categorical. He couldn't beat Charles. How did you? Yeah, well, it wasn't so much that Carlos, well, 2 things. One, sorry, 3 things. I know how good Charles Leclerc is. I think I know. And I've been saying for many years how good Charles Leclerc is. And I've always, long before Abu Dhabi 21, I always bracketed Charles in my best 3 drivers in Formula One, Max, Lewis and Charles. I always said that. I always bracketed them together. And I said there were obviously differences between the 3, but in terms of their innate feel for creativity in a corner and the way they can manage the front end, even with understeer, those guys all have that talent. I've since made a point, ever since Abu Dhabi 21, that Lewis has kind of fallen away from that because of A, the shock of Abu Dhabi, B, what George was doing in what was then a very difficult Mercedes, on the limit, young lion out there pushing it, and C, how bad that Mercedes was anyway. And all the things that Lewis needed and loved at that stage of his life, with 7 world championships, were not there. There was no front end, there was a flicky rear end, there was terrible bouncing, all the things that he'd never experienced before in his life in Formula One were all there. And so Lewis then he did quite a good job of rethinking the way he drove, and he became a sort of George clone in a way, a sort of smoother, less edgy George. Not as quick as George over 1 lap, but not bad at getting the best from the car when it was half reasonable. But he never went back to being the Lewis that he was in 21. Total confidence in the front and what he could do with the front and how he could take the brakes out of the front against steering load and get to a rotation point and get the car straight. All the things that Max does today. So that went away. So that was one thing. It never went away from Charles, even when the Ferrari was bad, because he's a different driver. He's still hungry. He's still quite willing to drive the thing on the absolute tiny sharp edge of the razor blade and just sit there for a lap or 2 in qualifying and try to get the quick lap. And then when he's done that, obviously back away a little bit and try to drive a race around that, which he's done pretty well on average, obviously with lots of mistakes creeping in because he is so near to the edge all the time. So that's that. Charles, very, very good. Then there is the Carlos Sainz factor, which is Carlos coming in as a driver who is basically quite oversteery, late turn in, long corners, and loves to be a little bit on opposite lock if he can get away with it without it being slow, but quite technical and very intelligent. And I think in the back half of 2023, he started to realize that the only way for him to establish himself alongside Leclerc at Ferrari was to back away a little bit from all the edges that he knew were there in his driving. And I'm not saying create shorter corners, but just be a little bit more supple in his initial turn in, and to give himself a little bit more time to feel what the car was going to do and just slow himself down a little bit and find a zone in which he could operate without making mistakes. Because if you drive like Carlos had previously, it was all about braking as late as he possibly could and getting the power on as soon as he possibly could. And he only needed a slight variation in tire temperature or bump or where he puts the brakes on for him to have an incident. And then he had a lot of those sorts of moments at Toro Rosso and so forth until he got to Ferrari. And then he found that sweet spot, and he found that he was able to lap pretty quickly and get the best from a half reasonable car and not be that far away from Charles. And he just started to hone that sweet spot. Let Charles continue to make the odd mistake because he's so much on the edge. But when Charles made mistakes, Carlos was right there to take advantage of it, and not much behind him anyway. And I think that's what was going on. And I think in 2024, that really worked for him. And he started to race well and get more and more confidence. He had a very good line of communication with his engineering team. He felt confident in the garage with what was going on. And he was just getting better and better all the time, which is why I say it was such a crying shame then, basically, to sack him. And even though he knew he was going to be sacked, he continued to drive beautifully, which I think says a lot about his character, which is another point. He's got a very, very strong character, Carlos Sainz, and he's there to win, and he's there always to believe in himself. So if you put all that together, putting Lewis in alongside Charles Leclerc, replacing Carlos Sainz, for me, it was a no-brainer that he was never, ever going to blow Charles away in the way Carlos had. And the results proved it. That's why I said what I said, because this was not Lewis 2007, 2008, 2009. This was Lewis, completely discombobulated by what happened at Abu Dhabi 21, driving differently now, and much more importantly, doing a Sebastian Vettel, not addressing any of the issues that were showing up alongside George, and just saying, right, I'm going to go to Ferrari now. I've earned this Ferrari drive and I'll win there. I'm a 7 times world champion. Charles Leclerc, yeah, he never won a championship. I can beat him. It was probably that. I don't want to put words in Lewis's mouth, but I'm sure people around him might well have said that, and it might have sat with him over the winter of 24, 25. And I don't think he spent enough time thinking what Charles does, how he drives, how he works, how he gets the best from the car. And when Charles started to go quicker, he was just shocked. He couldn't work out what was going on. So started to look at the telemetry of Charles. And of course, that would not translate to Lewis because he's driving the car a completely different way now. And that's what happened. And it's a great shame Carlos isn't at Ferrari now, I think. Great shame. I don't know what will happen at Williams, and they'll go round and round, won't they? But they've got Alpine to beat now, also with Mercedes engines. I'm not saying they won't, but they'll be there or thereabouts. But I think what I'm really saying is it's such a shame to see Carlos Sainz not in a Ferrari or a Red Bull or a Mercedes or an Aston Martin for that matter. Because I think imagine if Carlos Sainz, and this is nothing against Fernando Alonso, his arch rival, if you like. I'm not sure they're massive mates anymore, but that's only my trying to add 2 and 2 together and probably getting 5. But I don't think they're as close as they were. Imagine if it was not Fernando Alonso at Aston Martin this year, but it was Carlos Sainz with Lance Stroll in the other car. And the Adrian Newey design is really good. And the Honda engine thing, as I was saying earlier, with Adrian and Andy Carl is really good. And they're running the team really well. Carlos Sainz, potential world champion. And he's definitely got it in him. He's definitely got the talent, in my opinion, to win a world championship. And it's just the way the cards have fallen, isn't it? There he is in a Williams. And there's Fernando now in an Aston Martin Honda. Mac 790. Considering a prime Lewis lost to Button Rosberg, can we confidentiality, I think you mean confidently, say he would beat Leclerc? To me, Charles is in a different league to these two. At best, 50-50 for a prime Lewis. Yeah, I mean, technically it wasn't a prime Lewis because he got beaten by Button and Rosberg. So as a result of getting beaten by Button and Rosberg, Button obviously races Rosberg a championship. But as a result of those getting beaten, none of which Lewis would have enjoyed, he actually dug deep and became a better racing driver as a result. And the Lewis you saw in 21 was prime Lewis, in my opinion, better than Button Lewis or Rosberg Lewis. So I don't think it's correct to say that was prime Lewis then, if you get my point. And so, yeah, as I've just explained, post Abu Dhabi 21 was no way he was going to jump into a Ferrari and beat Charles Leclerc. Simple, for the reasons I've just said. Another super chat here. This is from Sashan RB. Peter, how did England develop such a deep talent pool of amazing engineers? It seems like other countries like Italy have fallen behind. Well, yeah, it's a good point and a good question too. I think a lot of it is due to this is now the Silicon Valley of Formula One, or England is. I say this, not Spain. England is the Silicon Valley of Formula One, and so therefore it's a big catchment area. If you take Southampton, Loughborough universities, very, very good in terms of engineering degrees and openness to Formula One. That's one thing. Secondly, is the history of the sport and how it's gravitated, how it's circulated around, orbited around the UK in many ways. If you go back to, let's say, the Coventry Climax era, when a lot of British teams started up because you, for the first time, could go out and buy a competitive Formula One engine, i.e. the Coventry Climax engine, which you could never have done before. Before that, it was an Alta, or you got a Maserati or an Alfa or a Ferrari engine or something weird. But here was the Coventry Climax off-the-shelf Formula One engine around which you could design and build your own Grand Prix car. As a result of which we had a Brabham, we had a Lola, we had a McLaren, we had all these different cars. And not so much a McLaren, actually, I guess. Cooper, certainly. And that happened. If you look at the history of that, that happened because of the Bentley boys, who in the 1930s were basically, focal point was Wolf Bonato, who was the son of a very wealthy South African mineral miner who loved his way of life in Berkeley Square or Belgrave Square, Berkeley Square, I think, and bought a Bentley and had a lot of mates, well-to-do mates as well. And they went to Le Mans and they won Le Mans. Sammy Davis was not part of that very wealthy clan, but he was still part of the Bentley boys and won Le Mans. All credit to him. And Wolf Bonato was a larger-than-life sort of racing figure that between years at Le Mans, raced at Brooklands. And he had a young mechanic called Walter Hassan. And Walter Hassan, through the confidence that Wolf Bonato showed in him, got jobs when World War II came that eventually led to him being hired by Coventry Climax to develop the famous fire pump engine. And so he was a racer with a Wolf Bonato background. He was at Climax. And when the war was over and Jack Brabham and John Cooper were looking at a way of trying to get a power unit for Formula One, Wally Hassan, who they knew, was their man. And he effectively, put the whole thing together. And the Climax engine thing started around him. So you could trace it right back to Wolf Bonato. And that Coventry Climax thing begat all those Formula One teams that I mentioned. And then it kind of continued with the Ford Cosworth thing through Colin Chapman. And obviously Lotus happened in Formula One because of Coventry Climax engines as well, another team. And because of that, Cosworth was born, and around Cosworth, Keith Duckworth and Mike Costin, came the Cosworth Ford DFE engine, which was basically the Coventry Climax model times two, and lots of teams created and built around that engine as well. So there you've got a lot of Formula One technology and engineers all around that England area, and it grew from there. Frank Williams wouldn't have started a Grand Prix team if the Ford Cosworth engine wasn't available to buy as a customer power unit to put in the back of a Brabham, which had been born of the same thing, really, the Climax engine, and went racing, and Williams became what it was. And it all started there. There was another trigger, which was 1955, when lots of things happened. The Le Mans disaster, obviously, when a factory Mercedes went into the crowd, sadly killing over 80 spectators, banning circuit racing in Switzerland forevermore. Alberto Ascari went into the harbour at Monaco and was then killed a week later testing at Monza. Talk about an irony. Stirling Moss won his first Grand Prix, and it happened to be in a factory Mercedes at the British Grand Prix at Aintree. And right at the end of the year, not unnoticed, a young dental student named Tony Brooks was asked to drive a Formula One Connaught in the Syracuse Grand Prix, a non-championship race, against the red Italian cars. and he won. And as a result of that win, which was a win echoed around the world of motorsport, everyone was shocked that he had managed to pull this off. Tony Brooks, what a driver. Connaught, what a team. Connaught sadly ran out of money thereafter, but that was a real wake-up call to Tony van der Velde and the Owen organisation, Van Wall and BRM. And to some extent, Colin Chapman got the bug as well as a result of that. So there was another flame that suddenly burst into life, into a much bigger fire that lit under the likes of Van Wall and certainly BRM to take Formula One to the Italians and beat the red cars. And that's what we saw. The first ever Constructors' World Championship, 1958, 3 years after Syracuse, won by Van Wall. So if you take all of that, it's no surprise really that England became this engineering hub, and it still is today. And that's why it is like that. It hasn't really changed ever since then. So there you go. So this is probably in response to my opening gambit that I wasn't massively into the Dakar, but this is from Drew saying, happy Uncle Peter, Henk Latigan going to win the Dakar. Well, I'll take your word for that one. All the best to Henk. Hope he does. David 1791. Hi Peter, hope all is well. Yeah, very good, thanks. Drew, from V10 to V8 to the V6 hybrid now, V6 electricity 50-50. What's next for Formula One? Maybe racing 1.8 litre VW Golf engines like we do on Thursday nights at the drags. Yeah, well, I hate to say it, it's going to be driverless cars at one point, isn't it? Somebody's going to suggest that. A driverless car race on race morning. I don't know. I was talking to my son about this the other day, and he loves cars. He loves rallying. He loves anything that's noisy and fun. And he was saying, you know, he's in year 9 at school, and he was saying that everybody else in his class, except for one mate, would all be completely happy to drive around in some enormous SUV, providing it had great Wi-Fi and great sound system, and just sit in the back watching movies. That's what, for many of the young kids today, motoring is all about. It's not about wanting to own an MGA or a Sprite or a Healy 3000 or a Lotus Elan or an E-Type. It's that. And what can you do? You know, all you can say is, well, I'm glad we knew those cars and that era happened, and B, let's still have them and drive them around. That's what I say. But Peter, you're polluting the atmosphere. Well, yeah, sadly I am, but I've got one response to that. I mean, it's not a stock response, but I would say that when the business world decides that it's much more logical to take your duty free when you land and buy your duty free when you land rather than when you take off, and massively increase the loads of all the aircraft around the world and therefore the fuel consumption of all those aircraft, then, you know, then I might think about getting a hybrid. Because think about it. Everybody goes to those duty-free shops. They're all at the beginning, you know, before you get on the flight, get there 2 hours early, 4 hours early. It's a big shopping mall in most of the airports now. Why? Because it's a money-making thing. People are a captive audience. They've got all these shops everywhere. Think about the weight of the bottles of fluid that are taken onto the planes around the world in any given year, and what effect that has on fuel consumption for the aircraft. Just think about that. I don't know what the numbers are, but I hate to think about it, actually. Talk about footprint. Talk about a ridiculous waste of money. And none of it needs to be there if the business world, the airports of the world all got together and said, this is crazy. From now on, it'd be illegal to have any duty-free shops open to anybody before departure. If they want to buy duty-free, it has to be, or whatever it is. It's not even duty-free anymore anyways. It's rubbish. If you want to buy anything, you buy it when you land. Otherwise, I know there'll be a massive outcry. Oh, the money will lose. It'll never happen. Well, you know, do you want to save the planet or not? That's my view. The other thing, and while I'm on it, another little thing that really gets up my nose is when you buy something these days so innocuous as a bottle of Coke or something, and there are still shops out there that automatically print out a paper receipt for whatever you bought. Might be a croissant or something. What is that all about? That paper that's being wasted. Who wants receipts for all that? Oh yeah, you know, I'm a traveling salesman. I have to hand in my receipts at the end of the month. Well, do it digitally. Thank you very much. Why do you have to do it with paper from trees? It's absolutely ludicrous. Anyway, there you go. Ollie Evans. Hi, Peter. What do you think of Anthony Hamilton's new racing series? It sounds like a very exciting prospect to me. Don't know. Don't know anything about it. So thank you for that one. I'll write it down. Anthony Hamilton Racing Series. Let's see what that's all about. He didn't send me an email about it, so it can't be that important. No, I'm only joking. Ben says the GOAT. Who's that? Michael Schumacher? Max Verstappen? Sterling Moss? Alberto Ascari? Kili Varzi? Tazio Nuvolari? Don't know. Anyway, here's to the GOATs. Zishan Afsar. Hi, Peter. What's the biggest challenge for Leclerc with the new Ferrari? Well, the biggest challenge is he doesn't have enough building blocks to, create something that's going to be better than everybody else. Obviously, from the engine power unit point of view, it's a big question mark. But then again, none of us know. We've got to be honest here. None of us know how those power units are going to compare when they come out of the box. Probably Formula One has got involved enough to make sure that they're all relatively equal. But it's hard to believe that some are going to get it as right as others in terms of the electrification aspect of the engine. That's the first thing. And secondly, as I say, building blocks. Ferrari had a very average car in 2025. So on what basis do you then develop a new car, regardless of what the new regulations are like? And I think it's just like, building a building. If you don't have the right foundations, it's very difficult to create a new building. You've really got to go back to square one. Now, it could be that with these regulations, it is back to square one, and that therefore Ferrari have a clean sheet of paper like everybody else, and maybe they'll come up with something that's incredibly impressive and does the job. But the engineers to whom I've spoken over the winter say that, oh no, it's still, McLaren will still have a good car, because there are going to be a lot of aspects of this car that will still apply to 2026. So on that basis, that's the hardest job he faces, I think. David 1791 Money again. Who do you think wins a championship first, George or Charles? I like Charles as the overall better driver than George, but I think George will win one before Charles, because I believe in Merc over Ferrari. Well, yeah, I agree with you. There's half a chance, more than half a chance, that George could be world champion in 26, because Mercedes, probably more than most, you got to say it's unlikely they're going to have a terrible car. That's a big statement. Of course, they'll have a pretty good car. How good it'll be, if the Honda Aston Martin is a great car, will a Mercedes be as good as that? An Adrian Newey car? Probably not, if Adrian's got it right. But that isn't to say that George couldn't win a world championship in a team as good as Mercedes. So yes, I think Fernando's got a great chance. If you had to say who is the driver most likely to win the world championship in 2026, I would say George Russell. And I think Kimi Antonelli will win a Grand Prix or two this year as well. And George is quite capable of doing that. Grand Inquisiteur. Hi, Peter. Looking at the full 26 driver lineup, which pairing or individual move do you think has the highest upside or risk in this completely reset environment? Which pairing or individual move do you think has the highest upside or risk? Well, I think keeping Lewis is... Well, let me rephrase it. I think Ferrari not taking Carlos Sainz back is possibly... It's too late to do that. No, I won't go down that path, because the reality is they chose... More important than that would have been Ferrari having Adrian Newey. And that's... If you want my opinion on that, that is the most significant thing that did not happen in 2025. Ferrari failed to hire Adrian Newey. And if they had, I think we'd be looking at a very, very different 2026. But they didn't. So that's the first thing. Driver lineup wise, I think McLaren are looking pretty good. Lando's relaxed. He's won his championship. He'll be very quick when the car's good. I think Oscar will be more scratchy, but it'll be more of a tiger. He'll be out there every race pushing hard, and I think he'll probably outpoint Lando. If the car's really good, I think Lando's got a very good chance of winning a second championship. If the car's average, by which I mean no better than a Red Bull a Mercedes or an Aston Martin or a Ferrari, then I think Oscar will probably do the better job, have more points anyway. So they've got a pretty good driver lineup right now. It's not as imbalanced as it was before Lando had won his world championship, if you see what I mean. And I think it favours Oscar more now, is what I'm really getting at. Red Bull, good driver lineup. If the Red Bull's a difficult car, I think Isaac Hadjar will get a bit frustrated and not possibly be the very smooth understudy to Max that he could be if Red Bull have a great car, because he's quite impatient, Isaac, I think, and quite intolerant of things not going in a logical way. He's quite emotional is what I'm really getting at, but hopefully he'll learn to control his emotions from Max. I think Max will be just laid back. If the car's good, brilliant, I'll win the championship. If it's not, I'll be doing the Nürburgring and a few other bits and bobs. And I'm not here to win world championships. I'm here to enjoy myself and go racing and do the best job I can on any given Sunday. And yeah, I'll go and drive for Aston and Adrian in 27. I think that's what his mentality will be if the Red Bull's not very good. If it is good, yeah, fine, carry on, please. And he'll do very well, obviously. Mercedes, yeah, they're ready for a championship again. George is ready. Car should be good. As I said, I think he's got a very good chance of winning the championship this year. Aston Martin, if Adrian's where he should be and where they should be, Fernando Alonso looking to be right up there with George as a potential championship contender. Ferrari, I don't think any of us think that Ferrari are going to be up there with Mercedes or Aston. And it's kind of moot, really, isn't it? What happens then? Because Charles will still do a good job. Lewis will probably be about the same, and that'll be it. But Charles will obviously then be an agent looking to get a decent drive for 27. And that'll either be, in my opinion, at Mercedes or potentially, if they don't get Max, obviously Aston Martin. Maybe even McLaren. If Oscar decides that he hasn't won a championship because blah, 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 he didn't get the best car and therefore he needs to be in a better team where they favour him. But I think if Oscar, now is the moment actually for Oscar to think, I'm going to stay at McLaren the rest of my life. Good team. If I stay here for the next 10 years, I'm bound to win 2 or 3 championships. That's what I would do if I was Oscar. But probably they're thinking the other way. Lando's won it, shouldn't have won it, unfair. Got to get Oscar out. I imagine that's what they're probably thinking. Not the way I would handle it. Muzam Gwyn. Hi, Peter. You've had an opportunity to drive the V8s and V10s. I believe, what's the power band like on both? If you had to pick one engine in Formula One to stick forever, which would you take? Well, I never drove a current V8. I drove a Cosworth, a 1967 Cosworth DFV V8 and a 2005 V10. So I can't compare the two. All I can say is that the V10 just seemed to rev forever, and you wanted it to rev forever. It was just the most amazing thing. It was just fabulous to drive. I can't use any other word. I wish I had a bigger vocabulary because I can't describe it any other way. Just fabulous. And the V8 Cosworth was a bit lumpy compared with the 10. As I say, it was a bit of a bang when the power comes in around it was about 6.5, I think, from memory. But the V10 didn't really have a bang. It was just sort of rev forever and quite a lot of torque too. So which one would I stick to? I think the Cosworth is the engine. I mean, the Cosworth engine was a wonderful engine. Yes, of course, by today's standards, lots of things could go wrong on a Cosworth and the seals and everything else. But the Cosworth, it was hard to beat the smell and the sound of a Cosworth engine on a crisp Sunday morning warm-up. And just that as it going down into the first corner. I just love Cosworth engines. In many ways, that is Formula One for me. But equally, I loved the smell and the sound of the Renault V10 as well. Well, the smell of the engine, not necessarily the fuel. I've got to say the fuel was not very nice, but the smell of the engine and the heat of the whole thing was just gorgeous. That Renault V10 was a very, very nice engine. I've actually got a model of it here. Over there. 1 second. See if I can get it. Yeah. There you go. What an engine. Beautiful. Pneumatic valves. Can't get it that sharp. Sharp. Come on, camera. Do your thing. Maybe block my face. Might be better. Hey, there you go. Lovely. Yeah, Renault V10. Renault V10. Williams FW14B. Active ride. Most technically advanced Formula One car of all time. Still is. Williams had about, I don't know. How many people did we have then? 600 probably in total in the team? No, less than that. Much less. 300 probably. But I don't know. In the drawing office, 150 maybe total. Bit different, isn't it? Not drawing office, the whole construction department of the car. Ah, finally, Bucky, Nick, sound and video good. Thank you very much. Yeah, good to know. If it wasn't, it would have been a bit of a, drama by now. I think there's another chat here that, sorry, super chat. I thought I saw one from New Zealand. Here's one, yeah. Here we go. This is from, sorry about this, mate. I know you came in a bit earlier, but just wanted to, this is from Resi Bro. Just wanted to ask a quick question since I'm a Kiwi. Have you watched V8 supercars recently? And if so, your thoughts on the season last year, your thoughts on some of the drivers. Love your insight on all matters motorsport. I have to confess, I haven't been, mate. I'm so sorry. I should have been. I'm a little bit, and I'm not a massive touring car guy these days because they just seem, I know there's a lot of close bashing and wheel slapping, and they have incidents and first laps and all that. But touring cars to me are have much too much grip. Whatever category they're in, they don't move around enough, and they're all too much on rails, in my opinion. And I love to see cars three-wheeling and sliding in the Lotus Cortina way. So I haven't been following it, but I do know, I mean, Cameron Waters, I don't know how he's gone this year, but I know he does quite a lot of work with Rob Wilson. So he's one guy I do know of and try to follow periodically. And I think at one point I was going to try and get him on the show to chat to him, which I should do this year. But as I say, I don't know how he went this year. I hope he went well. But I'm sorry to show my ignorance of that. And again, I'm going to put down another thing, Aussie B8s, and get Rob's input because he'll know what's going on. And as will Alan Gow, actually, because he's a big mate of James Courtney still. So we'll see what happens there. Okay. DBY90. Hey, Peter, as a non-works team buying an engine, how are they at a disadvantage compared to a works team? How makes the engine harder to integrate as a non-works team into the chassis? No, it's very good these days. And the rules actually stipulate that the engines have to be identical between the factory and the customer engines. I mean, why the teams agreed to that, I don't know. I would have said, well, if the team's not good enough to make their own engines, it's their problem. We'll sell them engines, but it won't be our spec. Why wouldn't you do that? Why did they all agree that they had to be the same power? I still find that astonishing. As astonishing as the teams agreeing to let Dallara build the Haas car still, when they're supposed to build it themselves. I just don't get that. And I think a team that does its own engines should have an advantage. And if Ferrari want to hold a bit back and have the factory engines better than the whatever it is, well, not anymore, I was going to say Sauber, but it's not, is it? Then, they should be entitled to do it, but they don't. And they've all agreed it's got to be the same engine. So it was all the same engine. It's quite boring. I think they can, a bit of the architecture can be different, battery placement, stuff like that, turbos maybe. But generally speaking, the engines are identical, as we saw with the McLaren constantly blowing away the factory Mercedes last year. So there you go. And I think it's not complicated to have different architecture if you want to, within reason. Cosmos Strike. They still have DRS now on the front and rear wings. Now the push to pass button. So what's changed? Still no real passing. Well, so what's changed, I think, would have been a good ending to your question. Nothing really. It's just artificial rubbish. Just even less chance to display the art of defense, I think, is what's changed. Still no real passing. Well, no, there's no real passing. And if they got rid of everything, there'd probably be more passing. As I've said many times, if you go to circuits like Saudi Arabia or Vegas, to name but two, you definitely have a lot of passing on those circuits with no DRS, no wings on the cars at all, but just fixed wings. If you want to have that, no DRS, you'd still have slipstreaming for sure. And And so they just magnify it all with DRS, and then circuits where you can't overtake anyway because the circuits are too tight and the cars are too big. The DRS doesn't help. And then you have the DRS trains, which actually reduce everything to zero and make it even worse. I think the push for pass thing is not because they want more passing. I think it's because, as I understand it, they are concerned that the cars as they are now, with the slightly reduced hybrid systems that they have, that are not going to be as quick in a straight line as last year's cars. And I think they don't want that shame, even though in my opinion it makes no difference whatsoever. I've never been interested in top speed. I don't think it means anything at all. It's all relative. But they don't want the shame of the car being any slower in a straight line. And so they've had this push to pass thing. I think that's what it is. If so, shame on them for going down that route, in my opinion. Cosmo Strek again. Peter, the Formula One engineers are smarter than the rule makers. Otherwise, the rules people would be working for a top Formula One team. Well, it's not so much that. It's they don't have the money and the facilities at the FIA to create the sort of package you would need in order to take on all 11 Formula One teams. And it's not that they're not as bright. It's just that they don't have anything like the same resources. So, and that will always be the case, won't it? Because you've got 11 teams, and we're all told they're, 1,200 people. I don't know how many people they've got now that you could argue are on the engineering side, but one team is probably, I don't know, at least 10 times bigger than the FIA's total capacity. And so that's why I say, the teams in the FIA obviously do work very closely, as does Formula One, in terms of coming up with regs that they think is going to improve Formula One. But usually they're trying to fix problems that don't exist in the first place, in my opinion. Cosmo again, final question. I think Peter seems like Formula One has started a balance of power system over 6 races to try to artificially keep the cars close. Well, we'll see whether it is actually that. I mean, that balance of power thing is kind of a turn-off for me in any form of racing. You win a race and you get penalised. It's just ridiculous. And bring on the days when you got the pole and you led from start to finish and your advantage got bigger race by race because you're doing a better job. What's wrong with that? That's racing. Another super chat, I think. Let's have a look. See if that's come in. Yeah, we've had that one, I think. What's this one? Okay, this is from Shaz Shank again, actually. Do current video game generation of Formula One drivers have an advantage over older people like Lewis? He wouldn't like to be called an older person, would he? There are so many buttons and knobs these days. That's a great question, actually. I like the way you phrased it. I like your turn of phrase. Buttons and knobs. Yeah, too many buttons and knobs. Agreed. I'm not sure. I think I can only. I mean, my son is, what is he, 14 now, and he's pretty good with buttons and knobs, but he doesn't play computer games. He doesn't play computer games as you're thinking of them. He actually uses the keyboard, and he does a lot of rally special stages on the keyboard. He's pretty good with that. But it doesn't involve a lot of buttons and knobs and everything else on the steering wheel. And what I'm getting at is I think most young people today, because they all are very computer friendly, whether it be an iPad, whether it be a desktop or whatever, a tablet, I should say, they're all pretty good at buttons and knobs, aren't they? And understanding how things work. And it's more that. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here. Max does do a lot of sim racing, but I don't think he likes the actual Formula One simulator as a way of driving the Grand Prix car. I think he probably is okay with it in terms of all the functions, and they're probably doing a lot right now in terms of managing the new power units and how you're going to do that and the push to pass and all that perfunctory stuff. But in terms of actually driving the car quickly, I don't think he's a great believer in the simulator. He just likes doing games, doesn't he? Racing games, and that's fine. So I don't think, and is that a way of saying I don't think it has that much effect on it? I think it's more guys like Sonoda and Lawson. It's not that they've done a lot of computer games. It's just that, well, they do, obviously. They do a lot of iRacing, I'm sure. But I think it's that because of the way the cars are set up with the left foot brake and this and that, they just become a little bit more ham-fisted than the really finessey drivers. And there's less, it's more difficult maybe to have more finesse. I'm going around in circles a little bit, but I don't know. You know, I guess you're talking to a purist here who thinks any person, any racing driver who doesn't drive instinctively and on the feel of the surface of the road through the car isn't really a racing driver worth his salt. Any racing driver that's grown up from computer stuff, that's fine to get you to a certain point, but then the computer stuff means nothing, and it's all about feeling the car. And I think a lot of drivers let the computer stuff continue to be a major part of it. And that's probably where they make a mistake, and where a guy like Max has got a very, very good cut-off line between a computer game and driving a racing car. And there's probably a lot of pressure on young people to continue that whole digital way of operating. Grand Inquisiteur. Top 3 French drivers for you. Wow. I'd have to put Jean-Pierre Vermeulen in there. Jean Berra, because I'm a mate of Nigel Roebuck. I don't know. I can't do top 3 because I think Jacques Lafitte is very underrated. I think Francois Sever is very underrated. I think Johnny Servo's Gavin was very, very quick. Jean-Pierre Jabouille, for what I was saying earlier, what a great driver engineer he was. Patrick Depailler, Didier Pironi, and right up to the current one, I'm Pierre Gasly, super quick. Isaac Hadjar, is he French? I think he's French, isn't he? So, is he? I better check that. I don't mind showing my ignorance here because he's got, I think, has he got a dual passport or not? I'm not sure if he has. Let's just have a look. Isaac Hadjar. Shows how much time I spend actually looking at entry lists and all that stuff. Those things just go straight in my head. He's a French motorsport racing driver. There you go. Yeah, he's French. Yeah, so many more. I couldn't even begin. I mean, obviously Alan Prost has to be right up there with the best of them. So too many. I can't pick the top 3, really. I couldn't do it. Too difficult. So sorry about that. Top 30 I could do probably. Couldn't even do top 13, I don't think. Drew says, if I was Lance Stroll, I'd leave driving in Formula One and tell Dad to have a rest. Take over the team. Going to happen anyway when Dad retires. That's where the big money is. Has been Newey boss is nice bragging rights. Yeah, well, I don't know. Lance Stroll he's always been a racing driver, hasn't he? And his dad's always believed that he's a potential world champion and done everything he can to create that platform for him. And I guess, you know, around the Christmas dinner, they're eventually saying, well, you know, Lance, here it is. You got everything now. You got a mega team. You got Adrian Newey. You got Honda engines. No excuse now. Deliver. So, if you're Lance Stroll, if you're Lance Stroll, you're thinking, if the car is good, for sure I'll be quick because I'm not that much slower than Sebastian Vettel. If not, I'm as quick as Sebastian Vettel. I know that from when he was there. Fernando's a different story, but he's not going to win every Grand Prix if we have a Grand Prix winning car. Look at Sergio Perez. He'd probably think he's better than Perez, I would imagine. So he's probably thinking, yeah, I'll win Grand Prix this year. And if he wins Grand Prix, he'll be around for another, 30 odd years, won't he? So there you go. I think, if he's not racing in Formula One, it's a different story for Stroll Senior. He probably still loves all the money side of it and making a fortune, but it wouldn't have the same spice of life for him, would it? If young Lance isn't there, would anybody want to work for Lance Stroll if he owned that team? Big question there, isn't it? Indra Masanka. New Year's, Peter. What's your thoughts on Esteban Ocon's driving style? Yeah, I'd put him somewhere near Alex Albon. In other words, pretty supple, not very spiky, but not very short corners. Shorter corners than Albon, I'd say, actually, thinking about it, but not not as fluid or as supple as Pierre Gasly, but not that far away. Not as fluid or as supple as Daniel Ricciardo, but shorter corners than Carlos Sainz. There you go. Make of that what you will. Ben 4810. We're talking about old videos in the archive now. The Jim Smith interview remains one of my favourites. To his first-hand tales of Jim Clark's Indy 500 win is incredible stuff. Well, thank you very much indeed, Ben, for saying that. And Jim Smith, for those that don't know the story, I used to do quite a lot of events for a company called Grand Prix Tours, very good company based in California, who run tours to Grand Prix. And I used to do a few talks over dinners and stuff. And particularly when they used to come to the Italian Grand Prix at Monza, it's all quite good fun. Really nice people. It's usually a group of about 25. And like you, they'd be asking similar questions to everybody on this live stream right now. But on one occasion, it was Italian Grand Prix. The actual event took place on a boat on Lake Como. And we were on the boat. Actually, my mum and dad were there. It was amazing. Yeah, they came out for that Italian Grand Prix as well. They came on the boat. Wonderful evening, great memories. And I was doing my usual thing and chatting away and did my talk, and people asked questions. And then we all sort of, I think it was like a buffet dinner thing going on, and we were standing around. And this Australian comes up and says, "Oh, you don't know me. My name's Smith." And I thought, no, I don't. I know a few Smiths in Australia, but I don't know you, mate. No. He said, "Well, I was on Jim Clark's car at Indy in '65. And I nearly dropped my plate. I couldn't believe it. And it was, he told me his whole story of how he came over on a boat and was just about to go back to Australia and saw this ad looking for mechanics to work for Lotus in Cheshunt, went up. Because he was a marine engineer, Colin Chapman immediately took a liking to him and gave him a job, I think, on Lotus Cortinas. And then in the classic Lotus way, we're talking 64 now, classic Lotus way, suddenly one of the mechanics was ill on the race team, and he suddenly found himself at, I don't know, wherever it was, Solitude, working on Jimmy's car. And then they needed a gearbox guy for Indy. Oh, you're a mechanic, you're a marine engineer, you get over to Indy. So he found himself on Jimmy's car, and he was on Jimmy's car. And he's in a lot of those pictures of Jimmy after the race, when they do those pictures on the day afterwards, on the empty grid, on the empty brickyard, bit of straight. And there's Jim Smith in the background. And he went back to Australia shortly afterwards, and we kept in touch. And I did that video with him. So if you haven't seen it, I think my memories of doing that video, which I did at DY on the beach, just behind the bushes behind the beach at DY, we sat down, and I think he was a bit shocked that I had the video camera there and a mic. And he said, "Oh, you're going to be interviewing? You're going to be recording all this?" I said, "Yeah." I haven't heard from Jim for a while. I hope he's okay. I've no idea about his whereabouts right now. I guess he's in Australia. Hopefully everything's well with him. But for a while, he used to send me these great pictures of massive, great oil tankers stuck in the middle of the Suez Canal or something, saying, "Yeah, this is what this bloke did wrong." He was really good on heavy ships. He really knew his stuff. I can imagine how he and Colin would have got on so well. Anyway, that's Jim Smith. If you haven't seen it, have a look at his videos. I also did one with Alan Moffat. Speaking of Aussie V8s, Alan Moffat, the great Australian touring car driver, right way to describe him, who was also on Jim Clark's car at Indy in '65. And he explains how that all came about as well. So if you're going down that path, have a look at the Alan Moffat one as well. Incredible. Hillary Imber. Hi, Peter. May I ask for life advice? Wow, I'm not sure I'm the right person for that. But anyway, if you're a bright graduate who lost focus and indulged in unproductive activities and being a loser, as a loser, what would you have done or told yourself to get back? Well, I mean, I won't dwell on this for very long, and I'm not sure this is really what people want on this thing. But I'm very happy to talk a little bit about it along the lines of, obviously, my own experience. And I was very lucky early on to discover Formula One and to become obsessed. Not obsessed is the wrong word, but to become very, very impressed by Jim Clark and the way he ran his life and the discipline he had in his life. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he didn't do this, he didn't do that. And so I just grew up as a teenager in Australia rejecting virtually everything that all my mates at school wanted to do and trying to think, well, what would Jim Clark do here? And that's how I did it. I said did it as if I've achieved something. I haven't. But what I never did was go down any of those paths, because I just thought, well, that's not the way they do it. And so my advice would be, don't be afraid to look at role models who haven't gone down those paths and look at the way they've lived their life. It always involves self-discipline, and it involves auto-suggestion, just as importantly, of not doing something. And not giving into something makes you feel much better than you think the next day. That's one thing I would say in my experience. And always listen to the voice inside you. Voice inside you. There is a voice inside you. It's a caddy, if you like. It's a little golf caddy in your mind who, if you listen hard enough and you look deep enough, is always there saying, no, come on, you can do it. You can do it. And if you've got a caddy and you slice the ball off on the first tee of the British Open, off into the right, into the out of bounds area, the caddy doesn't say to you, that was a ridiculous shot. Why are you even thinking that you're a golfer? Get off the course now. You're making a nonsense of it. Everybody's laughing at you. The caddy says, don't worry, we can recover. You got the bad shot out of the way. Let's get the other 17 holes sorted. That's what the caddy says. And that voice is inside everybody. You just got to listen for it. And you got to trust yourself. As Steve Waugh always said, trust yourself. Speaking of Steve Waugh, I was listening for about 3 hours to the radio last night of the final day of the 5th test in the Ashes. And what a day. And what a great job they do on the radio these days. Reminded me of the old days in Australia when I used to snuggle under the blankets trying to listen to Formula One stuff, never getting any on the radio in Australia, of course, but occasionally during the Tasman series, you'd get it during the day. But yeah, but listening to cricket on the radio is one of the great things. And what a brilliant win by Australia, not only in the 5th test, but in the Ashes series overall. Congratulations to Pat Cummins. He only played one match, I think, and Steve Smith, who also did a brilliant job, stand-in captain. What a team. Sounds like Formula One paddock is sterile. Yep. MPTW. It is that. I mean, you'll see pictures of the Heineken bar or whatever in the paddock and music playing and people all having fun and lots of glitz and bling and selfies. But that's not what we're talking about, is it? We're talking about Denny Hulme and Bruce McLaren having a chat by the Gulf motorhome, or Mario Andretti and Clay Regazzoni playing football out the back of the Ferrari thing. That's what we're talking about. And those things don't happen anymore. And it's that's why it is sterile. Yeah, absolutely. No question. Harlan 101. He's talking to Hilarm 615. Find the things that are making you unproductive, unmotivated, and slowly remove them from your... this is the advice. Find the things that are making you unproductive and slowly remove them from your routine. Get out and about, moving your body, breathing in air in the morning. Yeah, and I would just enhance that saying, keep moving. It's a simple 2 words, just keep moving all your life. Every time you're sitting still, you're kind of vegetating a little bit. I know everybody has to do that these days behind a computer, in the old days doing other stuff. But when you have the right opportunity, keep moving. Very important in life. And I suppose, I did forget to say that. I think Churchill used to call it the black dog, didn't he? When he got a bit down, or very down about things in life periodically. He always used to go and build brick walls because he found it very, very soothing to be constructing something. In my case, I think it was cleaning cars and cleaning my shoes, doing things like that, little things that, are relatively easy to do, but you're achieving something. And then beyond that, always exercise. If you're feeling pretty down about anything, the day's feeling a bit dull, exercise, even if it's a walk. A aerobic run would be as good, although there's always the impact from running. A walk is good. Cross trainer is good as well, obviously. Anything like that. Keep moving, keep exercising, and have self-discipline for that. It's much better, just on that working out thing, under the heading of life chatting, in my opinion and my experience, it's much better to do relatively easy workouts or walks 5 or 6 times a week than harder workouts at higher levels of heart rate, say 3 or 2 times a week. Having that consistent working out program is much better. And I think it's quite difficult to do that these days because a lot of the selling is based around having kit on your wrist, which is basically matching what you did this week with what you did the previous week. And are you getting better? And it's constantly pushing you. I don't think that's a very positive thing. I think it's better just to do, I've always felt that the right rate at which to work out, you should still be able to carry on a conversation, even if you're jogging. If you're breathing too hard, and then you can't do that, you're working out at a level that's very productive, but it's not productive in the sense that you can repeat it every day. And repeating it every day is the important thing. Not injuring yourself with too much impact, and being able to do it 4 or 5 or 6 times a week, really. 40 minutes a day. That would be my advice. And that'll have an amazing effect on your mental well-being as well. So there we go. Buck Nick. Hey, Peter, any inside information on Formula One's new power batteries? No. That's why I'm going to talk to some experts soon, get them on board. When we get a little bit nearer the launch time, or during the launch time, we'll have lots of people answering questions like that. But I'll put that down as well, battery developments. Rick Dale, thanks, Peter, for your historical content and sharing of your knowledge. Well, thank you very much. Nice of you to say so. There we go. I think we've got a lot more down here. Grandfather Gandalf the Fool, another of our regulars. Thank you very much. Hi, Peter. Hope you're doing great. Hope you have a great 26. Thank you. Yeah, looking forward to it very much. We're got quite a lot of projects in the go at the moment. A couple of movie things going on, none of which are yet fully signed and sealed, but looking a little bit more promising. They were, say, I don't know, a month ago. That's one thing, or two things. Building a new house on some land. That's another thing. Big project. And of course, you guys and the YouTube channel. A lot going on here. Okay. Hunter Jones says, I think you mean slowing the car down too much. You're talking about left foot braking here. Obviously, if you're on the brake, you are slowing down unless you also have enough throttle that cancels out any slowing. Yeah, but if you start using throttle to cancel out, you're just putting throttle on. If you've got the brakes on at an angle that you want in order to have the car killing its understeer, say, or dealing with its understeer, and you've got a nice balance, and you're doing that with a left foot brake. And then in order not to slow the car down, you give it throttle. That isn't necessarily going to make the car go faster again. It's just going to change the balance of the car. So that's where you've got to be very careful. It might in some situations, depends what angle you've got, but in most situations, just putting throttle on is actually going to make it worse. More fuel consumption, more tire usage, more energy going through the tires, and not necessarily making the car go faster. Maybe accentuating the problem. So that isn't actually the case, in my opinion. Andrew says, if you're never angry, you have no feelings or passion. That's correct. We all have these animal sides and we have these other sides. And the question is always balancing everything into a nice balance and making sure. I mean, it depends what the anger's like. Controlled anger is a really good thing. Uncontrolled anger is obviously not as good. So anyway, a bit of a chat going on about anger. David says, what fun you are that you are live. Yeah, well, thank you. Alive too, I think, is another thing. Stefan Beloff, discuss. Rick Dale. Yeah, Stefan, very nice guy. Very nice guy. I saw him win that famous Formula 2 race at Silverstone in the Maurer. Very, very good driver. Very, let me think, very Carlos Sainz-y, I'd say. Quite late turn in, very fluid, very nice to watch. Very nice guy. Always a smile on his face. And good team alongside Martin Brundle. Very good team Tyrrell had then. And yeah, what a shame. What a shame. Doing that sports car race. He and Jackie Ickx touched going into Eau Rouge, and he went head on into the barrier. And that was poor Stefan. And yeah, I took quite a lot of, I put a few pictures out of him on Twitter, I guess. I might repost some of those on the community. Put Beloff down there as well. Just, I don't have any more to say about him, really. I didn't know him that well. Just, hi, Stefan, how you doing? Yeah, good, buddy, good. How are you? What you doing? Yeah, good. It was like that. And, how did the car go? What happened here? He'd always be give you time. Very fast racing driver. For some reason, I have him bracketed in there with Henri Toivonen. I don't know why. Henri Toivonen, another rally driver mainly, but super good racing driver too. Had he focused as hopefully Kalle Rovanperä is this year on single seaters, then I think Henry would have been right up there in Formula One if he'd had that opportunity. But I would say Stefan, very similar sort of driver. iRacing Aussie says, Sir Peter. Yeah, right. I see that. It's so annoying, the New Year's honours list. Congratulations to Stuart Pringle, by the way, the BR of Silverstone, who got a OBE, putting him up there with Jim Clark in the New Year's honours list, but for different reasons, obviously. But congratulations to Stuart. Good guy. Like him. Very friendly and good guy. Been helpful to me over the years. And but getting back to the New Year's honours, you said Sir Peter. I know you were joking. You'd think that they would have changed it now to be able to give it posthumously, wouldn't you? And I mentioned it in a reply I did to somebody on Community. He was talking about the Surtees interview and how John Surtees was never made a knight. And I led a campaign for many years to trying to get that knighthood for John. Never happened. And now he's gone. And of course, now it never will happen. But I use as an example of the whole thing that's wrong with the honours system is R.J. Mitchell. If anybody deserved to be a knight, it was R.J. Mitchell, designer of the Spitfire. And he wasn't. And then he died quite at a very young age, before the Spitfire actually was massively successful. And they just say, oh, no, he's posthumous now. I can't give him one. Not allowed to. And I thought it was absolutely appalling that that rule was there. And that's, that prevents us still trying to get a knighthood for John Surtees. Anyway, going back, I was stunned by the brilliant job you did in your Toyota V10 test, in the intermediate conditions, no less. What a masterclass. Yeah, well, I wish it was. It wasn't any of those things. I was, spoon-fed by Toyota. They did a really good job with the engine mapping, and it was a bit dodgy when I was out on the slicks, I've got to say. But yeah, on the intermediates, it was good. And I didn't really get the brakes up to real temperature. I didn't do enough laps, but it was a lot of fun. Yeah, really enjoyed it. Thanks, Aussie Racing, iRacing Aussie, and best of wishes to you in 26. Hope you win lots of iRaces. By Peter, hope all's well from Amaral. Thank you very much. Buo, thank you, Peter. Blessings. Edgar Domelendez, thank you very much. Morale Taya, I think Oscar should be given a lot more credit. It's only his 3rd season, whereas Lando's 7th season. If he'll continue improving at the same rate, then Lando should be in trouble, eh? Yeah, you're right about that, obviously. But a good car's a good car, a good racing driver is a good racing driver, and many good racing drivers have won races in their first year and world championships thereafter. I mean, Jim Clark won the 62 World Championship, didn't he? And his first full season was 60. So, and he had a couple of massive shunts for various reasons between then and the World Championship. So, yeah, and obviously, you have a lot of drivers. I mean, Oscar's quick. And I don't think it made a lot of difference whether it was his 4th year, was his 3rd season. Yeah, that's a lot. There's a lot of races. A lot of races in 3 seasons these days. You're talking, average of 22. It's over 70 races. That's more than Jackie Stewart did. No, it's more than Jim Clark did in his entire career. So he's had a lot of experience. No reason to say the experience had anything to do with it. But he should be given a lot of credit for how well he drove for much of the year and how quick he was relative to Lando. That is where he should be given the credit. And I think he should be given the credit for keeping a relatively even keel in terms of his demeanour in the back half of the year. But the big question mark was Baku onwards. The 2 mistakes at Baku, the start and then the crash, as a result of the bad start, really, being where he was in traffic, I guess. And then obviously Singapore, and the effect that then had him on him at several races. That's nothing to do with being in only his 3rd season of Formula One. That's a different thing altogether. That's to do with, in my opinion, it was to do with Lando starting to go quite well with the sweet spot that he'd discovered for the first time that year. And then Oscar having a couple of bad races, starting to look too much at Lando's telemetry and what Lando was doing, and not being Oscar Piastri and just driving his own feel of the car and the way he wanted to drive. And I think that's where it changed for Oscar. Anyway, that's my opinion. No O-Time Hi, Peter. We all know that Jim is your GOAT, but what about Rushmore of Formula One? It's getting tougher and tougher to pick just four. Well, it is. And I mean, it's the jury's out really on the four that were picked for Rushmore anyway. So if they have enough trouble, there've been a lot more good racing drivers around than they have US presidents, that's for sure. So yeah, I mean, I've said many times I find it really difficult to compare the eras and take Jim Clark out of his era and putting him alongside Max Verstappen, or Max out of his era and putting him alongside Alberto Ascari. Different skills, different circuits, different seasons, different cars, different dangers. Everything's different. And so you can't compare them. And to come up with a Mount Rushmore, which I guess means 4 or 5 of the greatest of all time, very, very difficult. But certainly all you can say is Max is, right now, I'd say he's the best driver of this time. Well, I wouldn't say that. I'd say that categorically he is. And I'd say Jim Clark was the best of his era as well. And then we all go down to the pub and we say, well, yeah, Jimmy in a Red Bull would destroy Max, wouldn't we? He wouldn't destroy him, but I think he'd do all right. He'd hold his own. Just think how well Jimmy drove the, not that Max wouldn't either, but how well Jimmy drove the 4-wheel drive Felday, or the, what was it? He drove a Maserati, I think, at Rouen, the Remus, was it Remus Maserati? I think it was, yeah, at Rouen, 64, or the Lycoming special jet car thing at New Zealand. You know, if it had wheels, Jimmy would drive it, and he would always drive it really well. Or indeed the Volstead Ford Indy car at Riverside in 67, or the NASCAR Ford Fairlane at where was that? Rockingham in 67. Wasn't slow, that's for sure. Another one. Montañas Unidad Hispania. Wow, good name. Hispania. I sometimes see him in an Argentinian Formula One podcast. And this is Scalabroni, I think we're talking about, in YouTube. The guy's a genius. He explains things in a way no one else does. Enrique is a legend. Well, he is. I'm very pleased to hear you say that. Thank you. I was in touch with Enrique just over Christmas. His mum's just turned 100, looking 85. And I'm not sure he's playing as much golf as he used to, but he says he has no time. That's always the case with Enrique. Brilliant. This is Cans. I'm gonna have to call it a day pretty soon, guys. Just a couple of more questions. Canes, Cat's Heat. Wow. Good morning from Miami, Peter. Question to you, Peter. Will you be watching CTF Rock this weekend? This is probably the most stacked grid they've had. I expect the title to be won by Freddie or Ugo. Okay. I will watch that, and I'm starting to get quite impressed with Ugo, to the point where I'm thinking maybe I should try and interview him, because he seems such an exotically impressive guy. I know he's very tall, isn't he? But he was very quick in the Japanese Super Formula test just a couple of weeks ago. I think he was quickest, actually. And on that basis, I think he's worthy of a lot more attention. And so, yeah, I think I will watch that, because obviously a lot of good talent around. But I'm interested how Ugo goes. And more impressively, he's just been dropped by McLaren's academy thing, which is always a good thing, isn't it? He's on the road to success now, you would say. Oops, shouldn't be saying into that. Sorry, Zach. I'm kind of having a laugh, but you know what I mean. You know, why would you drop Ugo? Very good. But equally, you know, we've got young Leo in there, Leonardo. Let's hope, I keep saying, let's hope McLaren do something with the F2 champion, because he's got a lot of talent. I don't want to see him in the garage on headset. Thank you. I want to see him doing stuff. Don't forget Mark II Ford Escort race at Brands. Didn't Colin Chapman nearly win? He did nearly win it. And I'm saying Piers Courage won it, I think. But Colin was always quick in those things. And he was always a maniac on the roads. I think Jimmy was always a bit worried about driving with Colin, because he was really quick. And he flew aircraft the same way. He was unbelievably quick in light aircraft as well. Yeah, but no, Colin was good. And that's why, you know, you got this thing, you know, we shouldn't underrate that little bit of Jim Clark at the wheel in the book, when Jimmy talks in the chapter heading My Technique of Racing or Driving. racing, but it's actually about driving on this occasion when he's at Silverstone, and Colin wants to see what the Lotus Cortina is actually doing around the circuit, and sits next to Jimmy and says to Jimmy after a couple of laps, "Why are you turning into the corner so early? What's going on?" And Jimmy said, "Well, I always do that." Colin said, "Really?" And that's when Jimmy realized how much earlier he was turning in short corners. And Colin was stupefied by that. So I think from that we can take it that Colin was a long corner driver, Carlos Sainz-ish. Dimitris Michalis. Hi, Peter. Wish you a great 26. Well, you too. Happy New Year, Peter from Fangio5. Definitely. How far are Ferrari from Schumacher-like dominance? And if Max leaves Red Bull, will they become a backmarker team? Well, that's a good question. That's a very good question, isn't it? Because if Max left Red Bull at the end of 26, Hadjar will have learnt a bit from Max, unlike Liam or Perez or Yuki. He will actually have learnt, I think, because he's intelligent and he's good. So he'll be better than he is now. So he'll be pretty good. Max will be leaving not because Max will be leaving because the Red Bull isn't a great car. Because if it's a great race-winning, championship-winning car, he ain't going to leave Red Bull, I can tell you that. But if he does leave, it's because the car's not great, and he'll obviously go to Aston. And that leaves Hadjar in a not great Red Bull with somebody like, I don't know, maybe they'll get Carlos Sainz back. And then what would happen? Who's at Red Bull then? Yeah, I think they would become... Would they be as quick as Toro Rosso, as the B team? Be interesting. I mean, that's the other thing that could happen, is that Red Bull might sell that other Red Bull team, the Red Bull, Toro Rosso at some point. That's been on the market for years. It's just that nobody wants to pay the money they want. So that could happen, I guess. And I don't know. If they're not it wouldn't be the end of Red Bull, but it might be. Maybe the Red Bull bean counters now, post Dietrich Mateschitz, will say, well, we're not winning races anymore. It's all a bit boring and it's costing too much money, and we'll just sponsor a few cars and that's it. Leave it at that. We'll sponsor the Aston Martin. I don't know. It's interesting because they'll have that contract with Ford, but they can live with that. Maybe they'll exist as a powertrain manufacturer or something. Yeah, it could be. Could be a quantum shift in the way Red Bull have that team and run that team if Max does leave. Yeah, it's a good question. Dutch Racer 70. Would Arie Luyendyk in his prime be any good in a Formula One car? Yeah, definitely. Arie was quick, super quick, and he was a Stefan Belloff-ish type driver. Probably not as quick as Stefan, but he had flair, he had great car control, and everything was pretty fluid with Arie. And he showed that when he went to Indy. And I know it was mainly ovals, and he did have success on road courses, but on ovals he was unbelievably fast. And he was so fast that you don't do that unless you got a massive amount of talent, basically. I remember going to when was this? It must have been 93, I guess, after we won the championship. I guess it was 93. Might have been, 94 maybe. Around that time, I went to an IndyCar race at Vegas Oval. It was a 1 mile oval, not far from Ellis Air Force Base. I think it is. Would that be right? Yeah, I think it was Vegas. And it was a test day. It was like a Thursday. And Luyendyk was there. And it was before IRL. And they were running these, I don't know what, methanol things, unbelievably quick cars, Lola. And you could smell the methanol fuel and all the haze around the car. And I was on the outside of one of the bank corners, and Luyendyk, I have to say, it was the fastest thing I've ever seen in my life, was Luyendyk going around there. It was just like eye-wateringly quick. It was like, it was just incredible. And it was a hot day, and there was heat coming out of the car, and it was actually very scary. From that moment, I always thought, Arie Luyendyk, I will never, ever say that guy is not super quick, because he is and was. So, and I think now he's, very chill. I don't know if he's still got an art gallery and all that stuff, but he's a good bloke. Really like Arie. I'm not saying it because I like him. I just think he was so quick then. I think he was doing, I'm from memory, I think it's something like 230 mile an hour laps, something like that. King Arthur's finest. Should we make this the last? I don't like the track limits line judging we have now. I want them to go over the limits. Just don't cut a corner. Every kid knows that. Well, not everybody in rallying. All this cutting that goes on. You go around and the guy in front's dropped three bushes and a Christmas tree in front of you at the apex. Track limits, all that stuff. Yeah, Rob Wilson's just built a brick wall. I was thinking about that during the cricket commentary, actually, because one of the commentators was saying, I think it was old Jim Maxwell, actually. He used to go to my school, funnily enough. He was a couple of years ahead of me. Was saying, they were talking about the rope and how you slide along and, you can do all these antics on the rope, which marks the boundary on the grass. And Jim was saying, they should just bring back the old picket fence. Because there you could lean back against the fence and take a catch for a 6, even if you're over the line of the fence, and it would still be a catch, because you caught it. But you couldn't do that today with the old rope and get rid of the rope. They're all saying, oh no, much too dangerous. I couldn't do all the sliding and you break your leg if you hit the thing. And it's just like Formula One, isn't it? You want the brick wall, there's your track limits, but we want it safe as well. And the minute you create any sort of gap or room in which to maneuver to make it safe, obviously you're going to have a track limits problem. It's just a question of policing it correctly. And as I said, for me, they don't do enough with the track limits to make it something that the public can grasp and really get hold of. And they should have photographic cells under the point where they're measuring the track limits on the 2 or 3 corners of any given circuit. And we should see that as a graphic coming on screen as the car goes over it. And we can make the judgment as much as anybody else, whether they're over the line or not, and look at it from underneath. And yeah, it costs a lot of money. Yeah, but there's a lot of money in Formula One. Let's spend it on things like that, which really enhance the show. I don't know why they don't do that. And they just leave it to these stewards behind closed doors to suddenly say track limit, deleted or whatever. And let's see it ourselves. Yeah, we see the replay, the slow-mo, but we want to see the cells, thank you very much. Actually see it happening, in my opinion. I think it's part of the act, part of the show. Just as choosing which side the poleman wants to start is part of the show. Yeah, right, that's really going to happen. Prost, the GOAT. Yeah, well, that's a good title. Peter, what is your opinion on Fornaroli? And he won titles in Formula 3 and Formula 2 with no academy support. Well, yeah, as I said, I think it's because he didn't have any academy support that he did it. He didn't have Helmut Marko shouting at him down the telephone, or Mercedes or McLaren getting him to do all these sponsorship things, or supposedly learning to become a Grand Prix driver by sitting in on debriefs and putting a headset on in the garage when he should have been doing what he was doing, which is obviously preparing to win his own races and getting on with it. And I think a lot of that is a very good wake-up call for a lot of young drivers. The worst thing you can do is join one of these Formula One academies, because most of them are financially driven anyway, and you'll find there's a lot of guys there with a lot of money who then disappear when the money runs out. And very few of them actually focus on the reality of driving and getting on with it and racing and helping the driver find the money he needs to progress to the next level. Yes, there are exceptions. And yes, I know that, for example, without Zach Brown, Lando Norris probably wouldn't have got to where he was. And we know there are others as well. Obviously, classic examples, Max being a good one. But at the end of the day, a Formula One team, if it wants to set itself up as a self-contained global unit, which has its own media hub, which has its own technology DNA, which has its own business structure, then amongst its young academy drivers, who should all be chosen on talent, they should be able to have enough people and enough resources to enable these young drivers who have no money at all to use the Formula One team's business facilities to go out and raise the 1 million a year they need for Formula 3 and the 2 million a year they need to raise for Formula 2. And then let the drivers get on with it with proper tuition from somebody like Rob Wilson. That's all they need to be doing. Instead of which, they camouflage it and all this stuff with the headset and the sim and all this rubbish, all of which is relatively easy for any young driver to learn and adopt in a relatively short space of time. And that's called being in the academy. And that is why, in my opinion, Leo was, I keep getting his pronunciation wrong, Fornoldi, was successful, because he didn't have to focus on all that rubbish and he could just focus on being a racing driver and got together the right people to back him. I don't know what will happen to him next. I hope we see him in a Formula One McLaren race car inside 2 years. Otherwise, what's the point of him being there? He might look. What did I've got to remember his name now. This is senior moment now. What was the name of the very quick Brazilian who went to Aston Martin? You know, you all know who I mean. Who spent 600,000 a year on being the Aston Martin third driver, and then what's happened? He's now left. What did it do for his career? Nothing. It just stopped him racing. And all these academies, I think, in the same way that Formula One controls the way an engine manufacturer specs its engine for its customers, in other words, it has to be right up to factory spec, I think they should control the way they do sign young drivers and how the money is spent and the resources that are used. Now, a Formula One team sponsorship person would probably say to me, well, Peter, you're talking rubbish, because if we've got to deal with, I don't know, Tag Heuer, there's no way in the world we could then help this young driver, this young academy driver, go out and find a rival watch sponsor. I kind of get that, but really? Are you really telling me that on a Formula 2 car? It's really going to matter if he's got a different watch sponsor to you? You're trying to help the guy's career. You're trying to find money. And you're the great entity with all these connections around the world for how to find money and all the other stuff that a Formula One team can do and all the social media that you have, all of which can help him raise money. Let him use all those facilities. Let him go out there and raise money himself based on your media platform. That's what needs to happen, and it's not. They're much too much controlled, and it's like being in a oh wow, I'm a Ferrari academy driver. What is that? You know, how does that help? It's annoying me now, and you're going to think what an abysmal thing this is, but there's so many things out there, aren't there? Third driver, Aston Martin, 2025. What was he called? Felipe Drugovich. There you go. Yeah, I mean, what's it done for his career? All that Aston Martin Academy stuff. It wasn't Academy, a third driver, just buying his way into being on TV in a garage, you know, and doing a few FP1s. What's that all about? Doesn't help him at all. So anyway, I've had my rant on that. And I just hope, I mean, in a way, Leo's done it correctly. He hasn't allowed the academy stuff to affect the way he does his hungry Formula 3, Formula 2 stuff. And now he's won both. He's at McLaren. Yeah, okay. Because he hasn't got a Formula 1 drive. He might as well do it now with McLaren and be there and see what happens. You know, that maybe there's a vacancy in the Formula 1 team sooner rather than later. Who knows? So he might as well do that. But I think he's a shining example of how young drivers should not give up if they don't have an academy deal. Indeed, I think it's a very good example of how it can work for you, because you're not wasting your money giving it to a Formula 1 team. On the contrary, you can use it to try and build up a platform of your own. And just on that subject, I think a lot of drivers are underusing social media at the moment. And because they're so focused on what a Formula One team wants them to be like and how they should present themselves and what they should do, they focus on things like the gym and presentation and how they look and how fit they are and doing the sim and all that stuff. They don't focus actually on creating a YouTube channel that does a really good job for them, because they think, oh, well, you know, when I go to a Formula One team, they'll have their own YouTube channel and I'll be part of that. And I think that's a great shame, because it is out there for everybody to do. And if a young driver does it well, he's living a dream life that kids his own age would give anything to live. And if you really sat down and if you had money to give to a Formula One team to be part of an academy, and instead you spent that money creating a YouTube channel in which you had a videographer and maybe a lighting person, mic person to go with you everywhere and just put it out on YouTube, that would do very well. That would do very well. And if you've got that, then you've got something you can sell to sponsors as a real product, as distinct from Formula 3 or Formula 2, which has no exposure at all. But if you've got a big YouTube channel, that's a different thing. And that's how I would counsel a young driver. If he's got a budget that would be enough to get into an academy, I'd say don't do that. Do a YouTube channel instead. I think it would make a lot more sense and be independent. And then when you've won a championship in F2, then you can do your driver deal with the Formula 1 team. And good luck to Fornaroli. I think he's done a really good job with that. Top man. Okay, there we are. Thank you very much, everybody. for being a part of the show, because without you, this wouldn't be a show. You know, a lot of people do YouTube channels based on chatting to people and two of them chatting, and that's the show. But for me, the chat is with you guys, and that's you know, I'm very lucky that you want to be a part of it. And I just wanted to say a big thanks for doing that. You can see that I've got book a cameo, and I've got that up there because I never really thought much of it when Cameo initially approached me. I thought, yeah, right, that'll happen. But I've actually done quite a lot over Christmas and New Year and back end of last year. And I quite enjoy doing them. B, people seem to like them. And I just do them. You go to Cameo and I do them on a vertical on the phone and just send it off. It's not great production quality, but it's just a message, a personal message, whether it be somebody's birthday or some other big event, or maybe it's I don't know, Halloween, maybe it's Easter, whatever. So we can always do that. So Cameo, I've got that up there because, yeah, quite like Cameo. So thanks very much for that, Cameo, and thanks again to you guys for everything you've done. So yeah, we'll see you again soon. We'll be starting to do these live streams regularly now, and then, as I say, as we're getting much nearer to the launch dates of these cars, back end of this month, then we'll start getting lots of input from all the people that really know what they're talking about, which will be a good thing, I think. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care. See you very soon.